Hello guys, welcome to Soul Fiction. So in this video, we will see, what if Harry Potter was adopted by Whitebeard and inherited his devil fruit. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The son of the strongest man. The night the worlds broke open, the sky above Godric's Hollow turned the color of a bruise. Not purple. Not black. Something in between, something wrong, like the universe itself had been punched in the gut and was still trying to figure out how to breathe. Green light exploded through the windows of a small cottage on the edge of the village, a flash so bright it turned the shadows inside out, and then came the sound. Not the killing curse. Not the scream of a woman throwing herself between death and her child. No, this sound came after all of that. After the dark wizard with the snake-slit eyes pointed his wand at a baby boy in a crib and spoke two words that should have ended everything. The curse hit. The curse bounced. And reality cracked. It started as a hairline fracture in the air above the crib, barely visible, like someone had taken a razor to a pane of glass the size of the sky. The magical backlash from the failed killing curse, a spell powered by murder, hatred, and the fragmented soul of the darkest wizard in a century, met the ancient sacrificial protection of a mother's love, and the collision didn't just destroy Voldemort's body. It tore a hole in the fabric of existence itself. The crack widened. Wind howled through it, not English wind, not the cold November air of the village, but something stouter, wilder, carrying the smell of open ocean and sun-baked wood and a world that operated on rules so fundamentally different from this one that the two realities grinding against each other created sparks of raw dimensional energy. Baby Harry Potter, 15 months old, with a fresh lightning bolt scar bleeding on his forehead and tears streaming down his chubby face, was lifted from his crib by a force that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with physics breaking down at the seam between worlds. He didn't fall. He didn't fly. He slipped, through the crack, through the howling space between dimensions, through a tunnel of light and pressure and sound that would have killed any adult but somehow cradled this tiny, crying, impossibly lucky child like the universe owed him a favor. Which, honestly, it probably did. The crack sealed behind him with a sound like a thunderclap played backward, and Godric's Hollow went quiet. When Albus Dumbledore arrived hours later, he found the cottage destroyed, Voldemort's robes empty on the floor, and the crib, empty. He searched for years. Years. Tracking spells, blood magic, every tool in his considerable arsenal pointed at the same impossible conclusion: Harry Potter was alive. Harry Potter was somewhere. But that somewhere wasn't on any map of this world, and no spell Dumbledore cast could bridge the gap between where the boy was and where the old wizard stood. The boy who lived had vanished. And in another world entirely, on an ocean that stretched beyond imagination under a sky full of unfamiliar stars, a baby washed ashore in a basket made of splintered crib wood and shimmering magical energy, crying his lungs out on a beach of white sand. He'd been crying for hours by the time the ship appeared on the horizon. The Moby Dick was, by any reasonable standard, the single most terrifying vessel on the Grand Line. Not because of its size, though it was massive, a floating fortress of white oak and reinforced steel that displaced enough water to create its own tidal patterns. Not because of the flag it flew, though that Jolly Roger, the grinning skull with the crescent mustache set against a purple cross, was enough to make marine admirals reconsider their career choices. No, the Moby Dick was terrifying because of the man who stood at its helm, and on this particular morning, that man was in an excellent mood. Edward Newgate, Whitebeard, to the world, Pops, to the thousands of pirates who called him father, stood at the prow of his ship with a sake bottle in one hand and a newspaper in the other, laughing at something he'd read about the Marines' latest failed attempt to establish a base in his territory. The laughter started deep in his chest, rolled up through his massive frame like an earthquake building momentum, and exploded out of him in that unmistakable sound that made the ocean itself seem to flinch. Gururarara. Those idiots never learn. He was enormous. That's the first thing anyone ever noticed about him. Not just tall, though at over 20 feet, he towered over buildings and most ships, but present in a way that went beyond physical dimensions. Edward Newgate took up space in the world the way a mountain takes up space. You didn't look at him and see a man. You looked at him and saw a force of nature that had decided, for reasons known only to itself, to put on a coat and drink sake. His mustache, that legendary crescent of white hair that curved upward like a smile, twitched as he took another swig from his bottle. The nurses would yell at him later. They always did. And he'd laugh and drink more, because Edward Newgate had long ago decided that there were only two things in this world worth caring about, his family and his freedom. Everything else, the Marines, the world government, the other emperors, even death itself, could get in line. Pops. Marco the Phoenix dropped onto the deck from somewhere above, his sandals barely making a sound as he landed. 1st Division Commander, right-hand man, the closest thing Whitebeard had to an actual blood son even though they shared exactly zero genetics. Marco was lean where Whitebeard was massive, calm where Whitebeard was thunderous, and perpetually half-lidded in a way that made people think he was sleepy right up until the moment he erupted into blue phoenix fire and kicked their teeth in. We're approaching an island. Small one. Not on any chart I've seen, you are. Uncharted? Whitebeard lowered his newspaper, interested. The Grand Line was full of islands that didn't appear on maps, the sea itself was alive in ways that defied conventional understanding, and new landmasses could appear and disappear with the whims of magnetic fields and ocean currents. Any signs of habitation? Nothing on the Den mushy scans. Marco scratched the back of his head, his pineapple-shaped blonde hair somehow defying gravity even more than usual. But Thatch says he saw something on the beach through his scope. Something small. Define something small, you are. He said it looked like a basket. Whitebeard's eyes narrowed. Not in suspicion, in curiosity. In 20+ years of sailing the Grand Line, he'd learned that the sea had a way of putting things in your path for a reason. Islands appeared when you needed them. Storms cleared when they shouldn't have. And sometimes, just sometimes, the ocean handed you something precious and trusted you to take care of it. Change course, Whitebeard said simply. Let's go see what the sea left us. The island was barely an island at all, more like a large sandbar that had gotten ambitious, growing a few palm trees and a rocky outcropping as if trying to convince the ocean it deserved to exist. The Moby Dick anchored offshore, and Whitebeard himself took a small boat to the beach, because when something caught his attention, he didn't send subordinates to check it out. That wasn't how Edward Newgate operated. Marco came with him. So did Thatch, the 4th Division commander, a man with a pompadour so elaborate it practically had its own postal code and a grin so wide it made his face look like it was trying to split in half. And Jozu, 3rd Division commander, built like a diamond-plated refrigerator, standing at the back of the boat with his arms crossed and his expression set to its default mode of stoic but slightly confused. They heard the crying before they reached the shore. Not the crying of an animal. Not a seabird or a sea king pup or any of the 1,000 weird creatures that populated the Grand Line's islands. This was unmistakably, heartbreakingly human, a baby's wail, high and desperate and exhausted, the sound of a child who'd been crying so long their voice had gone raw but who kept going anyway because that's what babies do. They cry. They cry until someone comes. Whitebeard was out of the boat before it hit the sand. The basket was half buried in the beach, wedged between two rocks as if the tide had pushed it there and decided to keep it safe. It was made of wood, pale, splintered wood that didn't look like anything that grew in the Grand Line, wrapped in a blanket that shimmered faintly with a light that wasn't quite natural. And inside the basket, red-faced and furious and absolutely tiny, was a baby boy. He had black hair, wild, messy black hair that stuck up in every direction like it had given up on the concept of lying flat. His eyes, when they opened between sobs, were the most vivid green Whitebeard had ever seen, bright as sea glass, bright as the shallow water over a coral reef on a sunny day. And on his forehead, still raw, still faintly bleeding, was a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. Whitebeard stared at the baby. The baby stared at Whitebeard. For a moment, the crying stopped. Those green eyes went wide, impossibly wide for a face that small, taking in the enormous man crouching over the basket. 20 feet tall. Shoulders like a cliff face. A mustache that could double as a hammock. By every reasonable metric, Edward Newgate should have been the most terrifying thing this child had ever seen. The baby hiccuped once. Twice. Then he reached up with both chubby hands and grabbed Whitebeard's finger. And smiled. It was a wobbly, teary, snot-bubbled smile, the kind of smile that only a baby who's been through absolute hell and has decided that things might be okay now can produce. It was the most devastating weapon Whitebeard had ever encountered, and he'd fought Roger to a standstill. Gurururara. The laugh that escaped Whitebeard was different from his usual room-shaking roar. It was softer. Warmer. The kind of laugh that starts in the heart and doesn't bother asking the brain for permission. Well, well. What do we have here? Pops. Marco landed beside him, having flown ahead in his phoenix form to scout the island. His perpetually lazy expression had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like concern. There's nothing else on this island. No ship wreckage. No signs of anyone else. It's like this kid just appeared, He's got some kind of energy around him, Jozu rumbled, his diamond-enhanced senses picking up on something the others couldn't. Not like a devil fruit. Something else. Thatch crouched next to the basket, his pompadour casting a shadow over the baby like a small, hair-based umbrella. He's tiny, Pops. Can't be more than a year old. Maybe a little over. Who the hell leaves a baby on a deserted island? Whitebeard didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the baby, really looking, the way he looked at the ocean when he was reading its moods, the way he looked at a person when he was deciding if they had the spine to be family. The child was small, yes. Fragile, yes. But those green eyes held something that Whitebeard recognized with the bone-deep certainty of a man who'd spent decades sailing with the most dangerous and determined people on the planet. Will. This tiny, crying, abandoned child had will. The kind that didn't break. The kind that survived things it shouldn't survive. The kind that looked at the strongest man in the world and decided, on some instinctive, infant level, that this was someone worth reaching for. He's not abandoned, Whitebeard said finally, scooping the baby out of the basket with one massive hand. The child fit in his palm like a teacup, still gripping his finger, still smiling that devastating wobbly smile. The sea brought him to us. Pops, we can't just, Marco started. Can't what? Whitebeard's grin was slow, wide, and utterly non-negotiable. Can't take in a child who needs a family. Can't give a home to a kid the world tried to throw away. He held the baby up to eye level, and the child giggled, actually giggled, and patted Whitebeard's nose with a tiny hand. Gurururara. You've got guts, little one. I like that. Pops, he's a baby, so was Ace when I took him in. So was every single one of my sons when they were born. Whitebeard tucked the baby into the crook of his massive arm, and the child immediately snuggled into the warmth of his coat, green eyes drooping, the exhaustion of hours of crying finally catching up with him. The sea doesn't make mistakes, Marco. This boy was meant to find us. He looked down at the scar on the baby's forehead, that strange, jagged lightning bolt that seemed to pulse faintly with an energy none of them could identify. He needs a name. Thatch raised his hand like a school kid. Boo. Boo. What about, not you, Marco and Jozu said simultaneously. There was something carved into the basket, Jozu said, holding up a piece of the splintered wood. Letters were burned into it, not carved, burned, as if branded by energy rather than tools. H-R-Y. Harry. Whitebeard tested the word, rolling it around in his mouth like a sip of good sake. Harry. He looked down at the sleeping child in his arms, and that soft laugh rumbled through his chest again. Harry Newgate. My youngest son. Marco opened his mouth to protest. Then he closed it. Then he looked at the baby, this tiny, scarred, impossible baby who had somehow washed up on a deserted island in the most dangerous ocean in the world and survived, and something in his expression shifted. Not softened, exactly. Marco the Phoenix didn't soften. But the tension went out of his shoulders, and his half-lidded eyes gained a warmth that he'd deny if you ever pointed it out. He's gonna need diapers, you are. Then get diapers. Whitebeard was already walking back to the boat, the baby cradled against his chest, his laugh booming across the water. Gururara. My sons. Come meet your newest brother. And somewhere in the distance, the ocean seemed to sigh with relief. Like it had been holding its breath, waiting to see if this enormous, powerful, impossibly kind man would do exactly what it hoped he'd do. He did. Of course he did. That's what fathers do. Growing up on the Moby Dick was, by any conventional standard, absolutely insane. Harry's earliest memories were a kaleidoscope of chaos, warmth, and the constant smell of salt and sake. He remembered being carried on shoulders so broad they felt like a ship deck. He remembered laughter, always laughter, from dozens of different voices, rolling through the corridors of the massive vessel like thunder that never stopped rumbling. He remembered falling asleep to the sound of the ocean and waking up to the sound of Marco yelling at someone for setting fire to the galley. Again. He was 3 years old when he first realized that not everyone's family looked like his. They'd docked at a small island, one of the territories under Whitebeard's protection, a quiet fishing village where the people waved and smiled when the Moby Dick appeared on the horizon instead of running and screaming. Harry was sitting on Thatch's shoulders, Thatch's pompadour functioning as a surprisingly effective child seat, watching the villagers go about their day, when he spotted a small family walking past. A man, a woman, and a child about his age, holding hands, the adults looking down at the kid with soft expressions. Thatch. Yeah, little man. How come that kid only has 2 people? Thatch blinked. What do you mean? He's only got 2. Harry pointed at the family, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I've got hundreds. Is he okay? Does he need more? Can we give him some of ours? Thatch laughed so hard he almost dropped Harry off his shoulders. The story spread through the crew in approximately 11 minutes and became an instant legend. Vista, the 5th Division commander, laughed until his mustache literally curled tighter. Jozu cracked a rare smile. Izo, 16th Division commander and the most elegant person Harry had ever met, wiped away an actual tear. And Whitebeard, Pops, picked Harry up and set him on his knee and laughed that laugh that made the whole ship vibrate. Gururara. That's my son. The boy who thinks everyone deserves a family as big as his. Well, don't they? Harry asked, dead serious, and Whitebeard's laughter gentled into something that made the nearby sea calm down a little. Yeah, kid. They do. He was 5 when the magic started. Nobody called it magic, of course. This was the grand line. People here had seen devil fruit users turn into animals, control elements, warp reality in ways that would make a physicist weep. So when little Harry Newgate got upset during a sparring match with one of the younger crew members and accidentally levitated every piece of furniture in the mess hall 3 feet off the ground, the general reaction wasn't, "What sorcery is this?" but rather, "Huh. That's new." Could be a devil fruit, Marco mused, watching from the doorway as the tables and chairs slowly drifted back down. Harry was standing in the middle of the room with his hands out, eyes huge, looking equal parts terrified and fascinated. But I've never seen one that works like this. There's no transformation, no element control, no physical change. It's just, energy, you are. It's not a devil fruit, Whitebeard said. He was sitting in his chair at the head of the mess hall, the only piece of furniture that hadn't moved, because nothing in the world moved Edward Newgate unless Edward Newgate wanted to be moved. His eyes were fixed on Harry with an expression that mixed curiosity with something deeper, something that looked like recognition, though recognition of what, he didn't say. The boy hasn't eaten any fruit. I've made sure of that. Then what is it? Something from wherever he came from. Whitebeard took a long drink of sake. Something that came with him through that rift. They'd never figured out exactly how Harry had arrived. No devil fruit in recorded history could open dimensional portals, at least, none that anyone knew of. The Poneglyph scholars Whitebeard occasionally consulted had been stumped. Even the old man's own vast network of information brokers had turned up nothing. Baby appears on deserted island. Baby has strange scar. Baby radiates an energy signature that doesn't match any known devil fruit or hockey type. End of file. Until now. Pops, I didn't mean to. Harry's voice was small, wobbling between the tears of a 5-year-old who just scared himself and the stubbornness of a kid who absolutely was not going to cry in front of the crew. I just got mad and then everything went whoosh and, come here, son. Harry shuffled over, head down, clearly expecting to be in trouble. When he reached Whitebeard's chair, the old man picked him up and set him on the armrest, which on Whitebeard's chair was basically a small bench. Harry. Look at me. Green eyes met Whitebeard's. The kid's lower lip was trembling. Whitebeard's expression was gentle in the way that a mountain can be gentle, not by becoming smaller, but by making you feel safe in its shadow. You have a power, Whitebeard said simply. I don't know what it is yet. But I know this, power is a tool. Like a sword. Like a ship. Like hockey. It's not good or bad, it's what you do with it that matters. Understand? Harry sniffled. Yeah. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna learn about this power of yours. We're gonna train it. And you're gonna learn to control it so that the next time you get mad, you lift furniture because you want to, not because you can't help it. Whitebeard grinned, that massive crescent mustache curling upward. And once you can control it. Gururara. You're gonna be something else, kid. Harry looked up at his father, this impossible, enormous, infinitely patient man, and the trembling stopped. The fear didn't disappear, but it got smaller, squeezed into a corner by something bigger and warmer and fiercer. I'm gonna be strong like you, Pops. No. Whitebeard flicked Harry's forehead gently, which for Whitebeard meant Harry's entire body rocked backward about 6 inches. You're gonna be strong like you. That's better. The training started the next day, and it was absolutely, gloriously brutal. Not because anyone was cruel. The Whitebeard pirates didn't break their family members, they built them up, piece by piece, until the person underneath was harder than sea stone and twice as stubborn. But building up a kid with unidentified magical abilities and the willpower of a small hurricane required creativity. Marco took point on the basics. Combat awareness. Footwork. How to read an opponent's body language before they threw a punch. The Phoenix was patient in a way that surprised people who only knew him as a battlefield terror. He'd sit with Harry for hours on the training deck, correcting his stance, adjusting his guard, demonstrating the same kick 17 times without a flicker of annoyance. Your body is your first weapon, Marco told him during one of their early sessions, Harry panting on the deck after being swept for the dozenth time. Devil fruits, hockey, whatever that thing you've got is, none of it matters if your fundamentals are garbage. A man who can shake the world but can't throw a proper punch is just an earthquake with no aim. But Pops has been fighting for 50 years. He's earned the right to stand still and let his power do the work. You haven't earned anything yet. Marco's expression softened by approximately 1 degree, which for him was equivalent to a warm hug. Get up. Again. Harry got up. Again. And again. And again and again and again, because if there was one thing the Moby Dick taught you, it was that getting knocked down was temporary but giving up was permanent. The crew watched him grow from a clumsy 5-year-old who tripped over his own feet into a 7-year-old who could hold his own in basic sparring against crew members 3 times his size. They watched the magic evolve alongside him, accidental levitation becoming intentional telekinesis, random energy bursts becoming focused shields, sparks of light coalescing into something that looked almost like, he just shot light out of his hand, Thatch said flatly, watching from across the training deck as 7-year-old Harry pointed his finger at a target dummy and sent a bolt of golden energy slamming into its chest. The dummy exploded. Like, actual light. Out of his hand. Without a devil fruit. Yep, Marco agreed. That's not normal. Nope. Are we just, okay with this? Marco watched Harry whoop and do a victory dance around the smoldering remains of the target dummy, green eyes blazing with excitement, that wild black hair even more chaotic than usual. The kid was grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. Yeah, Marco said, and the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Yeah, I think we are. He was 8 when he met Ace. Port Gas D, Ace arrived on the Moby Dick the same way everything arrived in the Whitebeard pirates, loudly, violently, and with absolutely no regard for conventional social norms. He tried to kill Whitebeard. 100 times. Each attempt was more creative and more spectacularly failed than the last, and the crew treated the whole thing like a soap opera, taking bets on which method Ace would try next and how quickly Pops would shut it down. Harry was fascinated. Not by the murder attempts, those were just Tuesday on the Moby Dick. No, Harry was fascinated by Ace. By the fury in him, the wild reckless rage that burned even hotter than the Mara Mara no Mi he'd eventually eat. By the way his eyes would go dark when he thought nobody was watching, staring at his own hands like they belonged to someone he hated. By the question Harry overheard him muttering to himself late one night on the deck, when Ace thought the whole ship was asleep. Should I even have been born? Harry, who had been sneaking to the kitchen for a midnight snack, a tradition he'd learned from Thatch and would never abandon, stopped in the corridor. He was 8. He was small. He understood maybe 60% of the complicated adult emotions swirling through that question. But he understood the feeling behind it, the loneliness, the doubt, the desperate need for someone to answer the question and mean it. He walked onto the deck. Ace flinched, spinning around, fire already flickering at his fingertips. Who the, oh. You're the kid. I'm Harry. He sat down next to Ace, cross-legged, casual, like this was the most normal thing in the world. You're the guy who keeps trying to kill Pops. Ace's expression twisted. He's not he's everyone's Pops. That's how it works. I didn't ask for, neither did I. Harry looked up at Ace, those green eyes doing that thing they did, the thing that cut through defenses like they weren't even there. I showed up in a basket on a random island. No mom. No dad. No nothing. Just me and a blanket and a scar. He touched the lightning bolt on his forehead, almost absent-mindedly. Pops picked me up and said I was his son. I didn't ask for it either. But I'm glad he did it. Ace was quiet for a long time. The fire at his fingertips died down. The ocean whispered around the hull of the ship. Does it matter? Ace asked, and his voice was so raw it barely sounded like him. Where you came from? Who you came from? Does it matter? Harry thought about it. Really thought, not the quick answers that 8-year-olds usually gave. He thought about the basket and the scar and the world he'd never seen, the parents he'd never known, the life he'd never lived. He thought about Pop's laugh and Marco's training and Thatch's terrible jokes and the way the whole crew had wrapped around him like a shield made of people. Nah, he said finally. What matters is where you are now. And who's standing next to you. Ace stared at him. Then he laughed, short, sharp, surprised, and shoved Harry's head sideways with one hand. You're a weird kid, you know that. I live on a pirate ship with a guy whose mustache is bigger than I am. Weird is baseline, dude. Ace laughed again. Longer this time. Warmer. And something in his eyes shifted, not all the way, not yet, but enough. A crack in the armor. A sliver of light getting through. They sat on the deck until dawn, talking about nothing and everything, and when the sun came up and Marco found them both asleep against the railing, the phoenix sighed and threw blankets over both of them and went to tell Whitebeard that his two youngest sons had apparently decided to become friends. Whitebeard's laugh shook the entire ship. The years that followed were the best of Harry's life. Bar none. No contest. Not even close. He trained every single day. Combat with Marco in the mornings, hand-to-hand, swordsmanship. Vista insisted on giving him lessons and Harry discovered he was good with a blade, navigation, strategy. Hockey training with Whitebeard himself in the afternoons, the old man sitting in his chair on the deck while Harry tried to sense his intentions, to feel the presence of the crew members hidden around the ship, to project his will outward like a wave. Hockey is the spirit made manifest, Whitebeard told him when Harry was 10, sitting cross-legged on the deck with his eyes closed, sweat rolling down his face as he reached outward with his observation hockey. Every living thing has it. But not every living thing can use it. To use hockey, you need three things: awareness of others, will to act, and the conviction that your resolve will not break. Tell me, how many people are on this ship right now? Harry concentrated. The world behind his eyelids bloomed with presences, flickering lights of consciousness, each one unique, each one carrying its own emotional signature. He could feel Marco on the upper deck, calm and steady like a banked flame. Thatch in the kitchen, warm and bustling. Josu near the bow, solid and immovable. Ace somewhere below decks, a bonfire of restless energy. And underneath everything, massive and constant and inescapable as the ocean itself, Pops, a presence so enormous it was like trying to sense a mountain while standing on it. 1612, Harry said. No, 13. Someone just woke up below decks. Whitebeard's eyebrows rose. Not a lot. But for a man whose expressions usually ranged from amused to very amused, even a slight change was significant. Impressive, he said, and the pride in his voice was as warm as sunlight. You've surpassed most of the crew in observation. Now, let's see about your armament. Armament hockey came harder. Not because Harry lacked the will, the kid had willpower to spare, a stubborn streak so wide you could sail a ship through it, but because his magic kept interfering. When he tried to harden his fist with hockey, the magical energy in his body would surge up to meet it, creating a hybrid effect that was powerful but wildly unpredictable. One time, he punched a training post and the hockey magic fusion turned it into a flock of seagulls. Another time, it just vanished. Teleported. They found it 3 islands away, embedded in a cliff face, vibrating slightly. Your power doesn't want to be separate from hockey, Marco observed, watching Harry try for the 100th time to produce a clean armament coating. It wants to merge with it, you are. That's the problem. Every time I try to coat my fist, the magic jumps in and I get. Harry punched the air in frustration and a shockwave of combined hockey and magical energy rippled outward, rattling the rigging and making 3 nearby crew members duck. That. So stop fighting it. Harry blinked. What? Marco walked over and knocked on Harry's forehead with his knuckles. You've got 2 rivers running through you, kid. Hockey and whatever this other stuff is. You keep trying to dam one so the other can flow clean. That's not how it works. You gotta let them run together. Find the current where they merge naturally. But I can't control what happens when they mix. Yet. Marco turned away, hands in his pockets. You can't control it yet. But you will. Because you're too damn stubborn not to. Harry stared at his hands that crackled with an energy nobody in this world could name, an energy from a world he'd never seen, a legacy from parents he'd never known, and clenched them into fists. All right, he muttered. Both rivers. Same current. Let's go. It took him 2 more years. 2 years of daily practice, of meditation sessions that would have bored a monk to tears, of explosions and misfires and one incident where he accidentally turned the entire training deck invisible for 6 hours. But gradually, painstakingly, through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up, Harry Newgate learned to let his magic and his hockey flow as one. The result was something entirely new. When Harry coated his fist in armament hockey now, the black hardening was shot through with veins of gold, magical energy reinforcing the spiritual armor, making it denser, more resilient, and carrying properties that had no business existing in this world. A hockey punch could shatter stone. Harry's hybrid punch could shatter stone, then transmute the fragments into butterflies, then call the butterflies back and reform the stone. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was beautiful. Vista, watching from the sidelines, stroked his mustache thoughtfully. The boy fights like poetry written by an earthquake. That's weirdly accurate, Thatch admitted. Ace became Harry's brother in every way that mattered. Not just the formal kind, though that happened too, Ace eventually accepting Whitebeard's mark on his back with tears he'd deny until the day he died, but the deep, bone-level, ride-or-die kind of brotherhood that forms when two people who both know what it's like to wonder if they should exist look at each other and say, yes. Absolutely yes. They were inseparable. Ace, 5 years older, was the reckless one, charging into fights head first, grinning like a maniac, fire exploding from every pore. Harry was the creative one, using his magic and combat training to find angles Ace would never think of, setting up combinations that left enemies wondering if they were fighting one person or 10. Left. Harry would shout during a battle, and Ace would shoot a fire fist to the left without hesitating, without even looking, because he trusted Harry's observation hockey more than his own eyes. Down. Ace would yell, and Harry would drop flat a millisecond before a massive fireball sailed over his head and obliterated whatever was behind him. They had a combo move they called Supernova. Ace would launch a massive fireball into the air while Harry hit it with a hockey magic enhanced punch that compressed the fire into a single white-hot point before it detonated outward in all directions. They used it exactly once against a marine battleship that was harassing one of Whitebeard's protected islands. The ship didn't sink so much as evaporate. "We should probably not do that near civilians," Harry said afterward, watching the mushroom cloud dissipate over the empty ocean where the ship had been. "Yeah, probably," Ace agreed, completely unbothered. "Pops is gonna be annoyed. Pops is gonna think it's hilarious." He was right. Whitebeard laughed for 20 minutes straight and then drank an entire barrel of sake in celebration. The nurses yelled at him. He laughed more. Life on the Moby Dick continued. And through all of it, the training, the battles, the adventures that spanned oceans and islands and encounters with creatures and enemies that would fill a library's worth of stories, Harry grew. Not just physically, though he did that too. By 15, he was tall for his age, lean and corded with muscle from years of daily combat training, his wild black hair even more untamable than it had been as a baby. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead had faded to a thin white line, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. His green eyes, though, those never changed. They stayed the same impossible shade they'd been the day Whitebeard found him, carrying that same quality of seeing through things, past defenses and walls and masks, straight to the truth underneath. He grew as a fighter. By 16, he could hold his own against most of the division commanders in sparring, not beat them, not yet, but make them work for it. Marco still swept the floor with him regularly, and Vista could disarm him in a sword fight if the older man got serious, and Jozu was basically an immovable object that Harry couldn't budge no matter what he threw at it. But the gap was closing. Everyone could feel it. He grew as a pirate. He understood the code, Whitebeard's code, which was simpler than people thought. Protect your family. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Never start a fight, but always finish one. And above all else, live free. The world government, the Marines, the celestial dragons, they all wanted to put people in boxes, to tell them who they were and what they could be. Whitebeard's answer to all of that was a laugh and a fist and an ocean that stretched to the horizon. And he grew as a person. The magic inside him matured alongside everything else, deepening from the flashy energy blasts of childhood into something more nuanced, more controlled. He couldn't do everything, This wasn't like the organized magic of whatever world he came from. He had no wand, no spells, no textbooks. He had raw power and the training regimen of a Whitebeard pirate, and what emerged from that combination was something uniquely, unmistakably hairy. He could reinforce his body with magical energy, making himself faster and tougher than his physique alone would suggest. He could project shields of solidified magic that could block cannon fire. He could sense things that went beyond even observation hockey, emotional states, intentions, the faint residual energy of events that had happened in a place. And he could do one thing that nobody else on the Moby Dick could do, one thing that fascinated and slightly unnerved even Whitebeard himself. He could feel the scar. Not the physical scar, that had healed years ago. But something inside it. A presence. A fragment of something. Dark. Cold. Alien. Like a splinter of ice lodged in the warmest part of him, dormant but not dead, sleeping but not at peace. He told Pops about it once, when he was 14. Sat in the old man's shadow on the deck of the Moby Dick, the sun going down behind them, the sea turning gold and red. "There's something in me," Harry said quietly. "Something that isn't me. I can feel it, behind the scar. It's been there as long as I can remember." Whitebeard was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than the sea at dawn. "Many men carry darkness inside them, Harry. Some are born with it. Some earn it. Some have it forced upon them. The darkness doesn't define you, what you do with the light around it does. But what if it's, listen to me." Whitebeard's hand, enormous, scarred from 1,000 battles, warm as a hearthfire, settled on Harry's head. "You are my son. You are a Whitebeard pirate. Whatever is inside you, whatever it is, wherever it came from, it does not own you. You own it. And when the time comes to face it, you won't face it alone. That's what family is for." Harry leaned into his father's hand, and the knot in his chest loosened. Not gone. But manageable. Bearable. Because Pops said it would be okay. And Pops was the strongest man in the world. And the strongest man in the world didn't lie to his sons. He was 17 when everything fell apart. The news about Ace hit like a physical blow, like someone had reached into Harry's chest and squeezed. Portgas D. Ace, 2nd Division Commander, captured by the Marines. Scheduled for execution at Marineford. The world government was making a statement, drawing a line, daring Whitebeard to cross it. The old man didn't hesitate. "We're going to war," Whitebeard said, and his voice carried across every ship in his fleet, across every den mushy, across the entire breadth of his territory like a wave that couldn't be stopped. "My son is in chains. And no one puts my sons in chains." Harry stood on the deck of the Moby Dick as the fleet assembled. 43 ships from the Allied crews. 1,600 men and women of the Whitebeard pirates proper. Every division commander. Every ally. Everything they had, sailing toward the most fortified location the world government possessed, to fight every admiral, every vice-admiral, every warlord, and the combined might of Marine headquarters itself. For one man. Because that's what family meant. Marco landed beside Harry, already in combat form, blue phoenix flames flickering around his shoulders. "You ready for this, you are?" Harry's hands were shaking. Not from fear, from fury. His magic crackled around his fists, gold lightning dancing between his fingers, his hockey flaring outward in waves that made the nearby crew members flinch. The scar on his forehead, that thin white line he usually forgot about, was burning, pulsing with an energy he couldn't name and didn't care to. "They took our brother," Harry said. His voice was steady even though his hands weren't. "They're gonna learn why that was a mistake. The Battle of Marineford. The war that shook the world. Every history book that would ever be written about the Grand Line would devote chapters to what happened that day. The clash of emperors and admirals. The revelation of Whitebeard's true power. The alliances forged and broken in the heat of combat. The moments of heroism and horror that would echo through generations. Harry fought. God, did Harry fight. He tore through marine lines like a force of nature, his hybrid hockey magic creating chaos that no marine strategy had accounted for. He fought vice admirals and won. He fought pacifistas and reduced them to scrap metal. He stood shoulder to shoulder with his brothers and sisters and pushed back against the tide of the entire world government's military might. But it wasn't enough. He was fighting his way toward the execution platform when Ace died. Not the platform. Not the execution. Ace died after being freed, stepping between a magma fist and his younger brother Luffy, taking the blow that would have killed the rubber boy, choosing to die protecting someone he loved instead of living for himself. Harry felt it happen. Not with his eyes, he was 300 meters away, separated by a wall of marines and chaos and fire. He felt it with his observation hockey, with his magic, with every sense he had. One moment, Ace's presence was there, that bonfire of reckless, beautiful, furious energy that Harry had felt every day for 9 years. The next moment, gone. Like a candle being blown out. Like a star going dark. Like someone had reached into the tapestry of the world and ripped out a thread. Harry's scream shattered every window within 100 meters. The magical shockwave that exploded from him knocked back marines and pirates alike, a dome of raw golden energy that pulsed outward like a second sun. The ground cracked beneath his feet. The air shattered around him. His hockey and his magic fused into a single howl of grief so powerful that 3 vice admirals who were running toward him stopped dead in their tracks, their combat instincts overridden by the primal recognition that this was not someone they wanted to be near right now. But the grief was secondary to what came next. Because Harry looked toward the execution platform and saw something that replaced the grief with a cold, absolute horror. Whitebeard was dying. The old man, his father, the strongest man in the world, the mountain that could never be moved, was standing with half his face blown away, with holes in his chest, with wounds that would have killed any 10 normal men 100 times over, and he was still standing, still fighting, still roaring defiance at an entire world that wanted him dead. Harry ran. He ran faster than he'd ever moved in his life, magic boosting his speed, hockey clearing his path, his body a blur of black and gold cutting through the battlefield like a knife. He reached the area around Whitebeard just in time to see his father turn around. Turn to face his sons. His family. The only treasure he'd ever cared about. And Harry saw the look in the old man's eyes. Not pain. Not fear. Not regret. Peace. The absolute, unshakable peace of a man who had lived exactly the life he wanted to live, who had gotten exactly the thing he'd always wished for, and who was ready, truly, deeply ready, to let go. Pops. Harry's voice cracked, broke, shattered into a sound that wasn't quite a word anymore. He tried to reach him. Pushed through the last line of marines. But the old man's eyes found his across the chaos, and Whitebeard smiled. That smile. That damn smile. Wide and warm and impossibly gentle for a man who could crack the world in half. The smile of a father looking at his son and seeing everything he'd ever hoped for. And then Edward Newgate spoke his final words to his youngest son, not with his voice, which was giving out, but with his hockey, pressing the words directly into Harry's consciousness like a hand pressing a seal into wax. I'm proud of you, son. Live free. He died standing. Of course he did. Because Edward Newgate had spent his entire life standing against everything the world threw at him, and he wasn't about to stop just because his body decided to quit. He died with his coat open, showing the world his back, unmarked, unscathed, unscarred. Because Whitebeard never ran from a fight. Not once. Not ever. Harry stood in the middle of the battlefield, the war still raging around him, and felt the world go quiet. Not actually quiet. The sounds were still there, explosions, screams, the crack of ice and the roar of fire. But inside Harry, in that place where his magic and his hockey and his very soul were tangled together, everything went absolutely, perfectly, devastatingly silent. He'd lost Ace. He'd lost Pops. In a single day, the two pillars of his world had been ripped away, and the sky was caving in, and the ocean was rising up, and there was nothing, strong enough to hold it all back. Except the hands that grabbed him from behind and dragged him away from the battlefield. "We have to go, you." Marco's voice. Steady. Cracking, but steady. The Phoenix had tears in his eyes, actual tears, something Harry had never seen before and would never see again, but his grip was iron and his wings were spread and he was already lifting Harry off the ground. "Harry, we have to go. Now. Pops is gone." 3 words. The hardest 3 words Marco had ever spoken. His Phoenix flames were sputtering, his injuries were severe, and every fiber of his being was screaming at him to turn around and keep fighting. But he had a brother in his arms, a 17-year-old boy who had just watched his father die, and Marco the Phoenix had made a promise. "Take care of your brothers. All of them." So he flew. He gathered the retreat. He got as many of them out as he could, fighting through the chaos with Harry clutched against his chest, the boy's magic surging wildly around them both, golden energy crackling and sparking like a storm that couldn't decide whether to break or not. They escaped. Barely. The remnants of the Whitebeard pirates scattered across the Grand Line, bleeding and broken and reeling from a loss so enormous it felt like the ocean itself had gotten deeper. And Harry, standing on the deck of a borrowed ship as Marineford burned behind them, pressed his forehead against the railing and wept. For Ace. For Pops. For the family that had been whole just yesterday and was now full of holes that nothing could fill. The thing about grief is that it doesn't kill you. That's the cruel part. It would be easier if it did, easier to just stop, to lie down, to let the weight of it crush you flat. But grief doesn't work like that. Grief is the thing that sits on your chest and makes every breath a labor and every morning a question, why bother? Harry spent 6 months asking that question. 6 months in hiding, on a small island at the edge of the New World, surrounded by the remnants of his family, Marco, Vista, Jozu, Izo, Haruta, and the others who'd made it out. 6 months of barely eating, barely training, barely doing anything except sitting on the beach and staring at the horizon and feeling the massive, horrible emptiness where Pops and Ace used to be. Marco gave him space. For a while. Then, on the morning of the 7th month, the Phoenix kicked down the door of Harry's room at dawn, grabbed him by the ankle, and dragged him, literally dragged him, across the floor, down the hall, out the front door, to the training ground behind the house. "Get up," Marco said. Harry, lying face down in the dirt where he'd been deposited, didn't move. "Go away." "No. Marco, get up." Marco's voice had changed. Not angry, Marco rarely got angry. But the lazy, half-lidded calm was gone, replaced by something sharp and bright and absolutely unbending. "You've been lying down for 6 months, Harry. 6 months while the crew watched and waited and told themselves you just needed time. And you did. But time's up. You don't get to, I'm your brother. I get to do whatever I have to do to keep you alive. That includes kicking your ass if necessary." Marco crouched next to him. "Pops is dead. Ace is dead. That's real. That happened. And it's gonna hurt every single day for the rest of your life. I know because it hurts me too. But you lying in a room feeling sorry for yourself? That's not grief, Harry. That's surrender. And I've never, not once in 17 years, seen you surrender." Harry didn't move. But his hands, pressed into the dirt, clenched into fists. "Pops told you to live free," Marco continued, his voice softer now. "Free doesn't mean without pain. It means without chains. And right now, kid, you've got chains on your ankles made of guilt and grief and they're dragging you straight to the bottom. So here's what's gonna happen. Marco stood up and extended a hand. You're gonna get up. You're gonna train. You're gonna eat. You're gonna live. Not because the pain goes away, but because you carry it. Because that's what Whitebeard pirates do. The silence stretched. The ocean whispered. The wind carried the distant sound of the crew's voices, quieter than they used to be, smaller, but still there. Still together. Harry took Marco's hand. He got up. And the real work began. The Gura Gura no Mi came to him 3 weeks later. Not through theft. Not through violence. Not through the horrific method that Blackbeard had used at Marineford to tear the power from Whitebeard's corpse, a method that still made Harry's blood boil so hot his magic spontaneously combusted nearby objects when he thought about it. No. The Gura Gura no Mi came to Harry through something Whitebeard had prepared years in advance, because Edward Newgate was many things, a pirate, a father, a force of nature, but he was never, ever stupid. It was Marco who showed Harry the fruit. They were in a hidden chamber beneath the house on the island, a chamber that Whitebeard had built decades ago, one of several caches scattered across the New World for exactly this kind of emergency. Inside the chamber, sealed in a case made of sea stone and ancient wood, was a devil fruit. Not the Gura Gura no Mi. That power had been taken by Blackbeard. No, this fruit was something else, something Whitebeard had obtained through channels that even Marco didn't fully understand. It was round, pale, covered in the distinctive swirling patterns of a devil fruit, and it pulsed with a vibration so deep Harry could feel it in his teeth. Pops prepared this, Marco said, his voice carefully neutral. A long time ago. He knew, somehow he always knew, that the Gura Gura no Mi might fall into the wrong hands after he was gone. So he made arrangements. What kind of arrangements? The kind that take 30 years and favors from people whose names I'm not allowed to say. Marco opened the case, and the vibration intensified. The air around the fruit seemed to shimmer, to crack, like reality itself was having trouble holding together in its presence. This fruit is related to the Gura Gura no Mi. Not a copy. Not a lesser version. Pops called it a resonance fruit, a devil fruit that formed in response to the original, attuned to the same fundamental frequency of the world. Harry stared at the fruit. I don't understand. Think of it like this. Marco leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. The Gura Gura no Mi is the power to create quakes, to vibrate the world itself. But vibrations don't just happen at one frequency. They create harmonics. Echoes. And over centuries, those echoes can condense into a fruit of their own. Pops found this one 20 years ago and kept it hidden. He always said it was for. Marco's voice caught. Just for a second. For the right son. The one who'd need it most. And you think that's me? I know it's you are. Marco pushed off the wall and stood in front of Harry, and for the first time in months, his expression was completely open. No lazy half-lid. No ironic detachment. Just raw, honest conviction. You're the one he trained personally. You're the one who inherited his will. And you're the one who has something no other devil fruit user on this ocean has, magic that can merge with the power and make it into something new. Something that's entirely yours. Harry looked at the fruit. He looked at Marco. He thought about Pops, about the old man's laugh, his smile, the warmth of his hand on Harry's head. He thought about the words pressed into his consciousness on the battlefield at Marineford. Live free. He picked up the fruit. It tasted exactly as terrible as every devil fruit user had ever described, like drinking battery acid mixed with rotten fish and the crushed dreams of every chef who'd ever tried to make devil fruit cuisine work. Harry gagged, his eyes watered, and for approximately 4 seconds he was absolutely convinced he was going to die. Then the power hit. It started in his stomach and radiated outward like a shockwave, which, given the nature of the fruit, was horrifyingly appropriate. Every cell in Harry's body vibrated. Not painfully. Not even uncomfortably. It was more like tuning. Like every part of him was being adjusted to the same frequency, the same fundamental note, the same deep hum that underlay the structure of reality itself. And then the vibration met his magic. Oh. Oh. The magic didn't resist. It didn't fight. It reached toward the devil fruit power like it had been waiting for exactly this, like two halves of a broken thing finally finding each other. They merged, not clumsily, not painfully, but smoothly, naturally, like water flowing into water. And what emerged from the merger was, Harry's fist clenched, and the air in front of him cracked. Not broke. Cracked. A literal fissure appeared in the space between his hand and the wall, a white line of fractured reality that pulsed with gold and black energy, quake power and magic and hockey all woven together into something that shouldn't exist, something that had never existed before. The wall behind the fissure exploded outward. Not just the wall, the hillside behind it. And the trees behind that. And the cliff face behind that. A trench of shattered earth extending 200 meters from where Harry stood, carved into the landscape like God had drawn a line with his finger. Silence. Then Marco exhaled. Long and slow and not quite steady. Well, the Phoenix said. That's terrifying. Harry looked at his hand. The veins in his forearm were glowing, faintly, barely visible, but there, alternating patterns of black, hockey, gold, magic, and white, quake. 3 powers. 1 body. 1 impossible, beautiful, terrifying boy standing in a room with a hole in the wall that used to be a mountainside. I can feel it, Harry whispered. The vibration of everything. The air. The ground. The ocean. It's all, humming. And I can change the tune. That's the Gura Gura no Mi. Marco walked to the edge of the newly created canyon and looked down. The power to vibrate anything. Whitebeard could crack the air, shatter ice, create tsunamis. But you. He looked back at Harry with an expression that mixed brotherly pride with genuine unease. You've got magic woven into it. You're not just vibrating reality. You're vibrating it with intent. With magical will. What does that mean? Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, small, tired, real. It means you might actually be able to do what Pops couldn't, you are. What's that? Protect everyone. The next 2 years were a montage of growth so intense it almost hurt to watch. Harry trained with the quake power every single day, and the learning curve was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying. The basic applications came quickly. He could crack the air within a week, create localized earthquakes within a month, generate tsunamis, which he practiced far from any inhabited islands, thank you very much, within 3 months. The power was instinctive in a way his magic had never been, like his body had been built for exactly this frequency, like the vibrations had been waiting for someone with his particular combination of abilities to come along and give them direction. The advanced applications took longer. Much longer. Whitebeard had used the Gura Gura no Mi as a blunt instrument, not because he lacked finesse, but because when you're the strongest man in the world, finesse is often unnecessary. Why pick a lock when you can knock down the building? But Harry wasn't Whitebeard. Harry was smaller, faster, more agile, and he had magic braided through his quake powers like gold thread through a tapestry. He couldn't fight like Pops. He had to fight like himself. So he developed his own style. Quake step, vibrating the air beneath his feet to create instantaneous movement, basically teleporting short distances by making the space between here and there temporarily meaningless. It looked like apparition to anyone who'd seen wizards move, but it was purely physics-based, exploiting the vibrational frequency of space itself. Tremor guard, using the quake power defensively, setting up a field of vibrations around his body that disrupted incoming attacks. Bullets shattered. Blades dulled. Even energy attacks like lasers would scatter and diffuse when they hit the vibrating field. And the big one. The one that made Marco actually step back the first time Harry demonstrated it. Quake Fist. It was technically simple: coat your fist in armament hockey, layer the Gura Gura no Mi's vibrations over it, then weave magic through both. Punch. The result was a strike that didn't just hit the target, it hit everything the target was connected to. Punch a wall, and the building shook. Punch the ground, and the island trembled. Punch the air, and the sky split. Harry punched the air during a training session, and the shockwave that traveled outward split the clouds above the island for 3 miles in every direction, revealing a perfect circle of blue sky in the middle of an overcast afternoon. Vista, watching from a safe distance, which he'd calculated to be approximately 1 island away, lowered his binoculars and quietly said, "The boy is going to surpass his father." Jozu, standing next to him, nodded once. "Already has. In some ways. Pops would be laughing right now. Pops is always laughing." 2 years after Marineford. Harry was 19. He stood on the deck of a ship, not the Moby Dick, which had been too damaged to sail, but a smaller vessel that the remnants had rebuilt and rechristened the Whitebeard's will. His crew, because they were his crew now, following him by choice, because Marco had looked at the assembled remnants and said, "He's the one," and nobody had argued, spread across 4 ships in a small fleet. Not an armada. Not yet. But a force to be reckoned with. The world had changed in 2 years. The Yonko balance had shifted. Blackbeard had risen. The Marines had restructured. The supernovas had made their moves. And in the background, quietly, the sun Whitebeard had raised from a basket on a beach had been building something new from the ashes of the old. Harry stood at the prow, watching the horizon, feeling the vibration of the ocean through the hull of the ship. His observation hockey spread outward like a net, covering miles in every direction, picking up the presence of sea creatures and distant ships and weather patterns and all the vast, humming complexity of the Grand Line. He was taller now. Lean and sharp-featured, with his mother's eyes and his father's, his adopted father's, grin. The wild black hair was longer, tied back with a piece of cloth torn from Whitebeard's coat. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead was hidden beneath his bangs most of the time, a secret he carried without even knowing its full story. And around his left forearm, tattooed in dark ink, was Whitebeard's Jolly Roger, the mark of a son who refused to let his father's legacy fade. Marco landed beside him, shifting from phoenix form to human in a burst of blue flame. "News from the New World, you are. Good or bad? Depends on your definition." Marco handed him a newspaper. "Blackbeard's making moves in the Eastern Territories. The Marines have a new fleet stationed at G1. And..." He paused. "There's something else. Something weird." Define weird. 3 islands in the Florian Triangle have reported strange phenomena. Energy signatures that don't match any known devil fruit. Structures appearing overnight, stone circles, carved with symbols nobody can read. And witnesses are reporting people in robes. Harry frowned. Robes? Long robes. Carrying sticks. Speaking a language that the translation snails can't process. Marco watched Harry carefully. "Ring any bells?" The scar on Harry's forehead tingled. Just faintly. Like a memory trying to surface from deep water. "No," Harry said slowly. "But I've got a feeling it's about to." He looked back at the horizon. The ocean stretched out before him, infinite, dangerous, beautiful, full of secrets and enemies and adventures that hadn't happened yet. Behind him, his crew prepared the ship for the next leg of their journey. Marco at his right hand. Vista and Jozu commanding the flanking vessels. The flag above him catching the wind, Whitebeard's Jolly Roger, flying proud, declaring to the world that the old man's legacy wasn't just alive. It was growing. Harry Newgate. Son of Whitebeard. Carrier of the quake. The boy who fell between worlds and landed in the arms of a giant. He was 19 years old, he had the power to crack the planet in half, and he had absolutely no idea that a 150-year-old wizard was standing on an island 300 miles behind him, holding a broken compass that was spinning wildly, tears streaming into a silver beard, whispering, "Found you." The ocean hummed. The ship cut through the waves. And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across a clear sky, not a storm, not a weather pattern, but the echo of two worlds grinding against each other, getting closer, the crack between them widening inch by inch. Harry felt it in his bones. In his quake. In his magic. In the scar that pulsed like a heartbeat on his forehead. Something was coming. Something big. He grinned, wide, sharp, absolutely fearless, and the resemblance to Whitebeard in that moment was so strong that Marco had to look away for a second, blinking hard. "All right," Harry said, gripping the railing, letting the salt spray hit his face. "Whatever it is, bring it. I'm a son of Whitebeard. And we don't run from anything." The Whitebeards will surged forward into the unknown. And the world held its breath. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2, The World That Forgot Him. The island didn't have a name. Most islands in the Florian Triangle didn't, because most islands in the Florian Triangle had the good sense to not exist for very long. They'd bubble up from the ocean floor, spend a few weeks being mysterious and fog-shrouded and generally unsettling, and then sink back down like the sea had changed its mind about them. Cartographers had given up trying to map the triangle centuries ago. The place was less a geographic region and more a mood, the ocean's way of saying, "Here be nonsense, enter at your own risk." But this island was different. This island had been here for at least 3 months, according to the reports Marco had gathered. 3 months of solid, unmoving, stubbornly existing landmass in a region where nothing stayed put for more than a few weeks. And in those 3 months, things had started appearing on it. Stone circles. Carved pillars. Structures that looked ancient but radiated energy signatures so fresh they practically had that new construction smell. And now, standing on the deck of the Whitebeards well as it cut through the perpetual fog of the triangle, Harry could feel it. Not with his eyes, the fog was thick enough to chew, a grey soup that swallowed sound and light and sanity in equal measure. Not with his observation hockey, which was picking up the island's wildlife, mostly weird bugs and weirder birds, but nothing that registered as a human presence. No, Harry felt the island with something deeper. Something older. The magic inside him, that river of golden energy that had been part of him since before he could remember, was resonating. Vibrating in sympathy with something on that island, like a tuning fork responding to a note played in another room. "You feel it too, you are." Marco stood beside him, arms crossed, his phoenix flames flickering faintly at his shoulders in an unconscious defensive response. Even the phoenix was unsettled by the triangle, though he'd sooner eat his own sandals than admit it. "Yeah." Harry's hand drifted to his forehead, pressing against the scar beneath his bangs. It was warm. Not painful, it hadn't been painful since Marineford, when the grief and fury had burned through whatever dormant connection the scar represented and seemingly cauterized it. But warm. Aware. Like it was paying attention to something Harry couldn't see yet. It's like, you know when you hear a song you've never heard before, but your body knows the melody? Like you learned it in a dream? Can't say I do, but I'll take your word for it. There's something on that island that's connected to me. To my magic. To whatever I am underneath all the pirate training in quake power. Harry's green eyes were fixed on the fog ahead, seeing through it the way his hybrid observation hockey allowed, not visual penetration but a sense of what lay beyond, a shape in the magical landscape that was growing clearer with every passing minute. I think it's connected to where I came from." Marco didn't respond immediately. He watched Harry, watched the way the kids, not a kid anymore, Marco reminded himself, 19 and powerful enough to split islands, but still a kid to Marco, still the 8-year-old who sat on the deck with Ace and talked about what mattered. Hands were steady even though the magic crackling around his knuckles said his body was anything but calm. "Whatever's there," Marco said finally, "we handle it together. That's non-negotiable." Harry glanced at him. Grinned. That Whitebeard grin, wide and warm and utterly devoid of doubt. Was never gonna be any other way, brother. They anchored offshore and took a landing party. Harry, Marco, Vista, who had volunteered with a suspiciously eager mustache twirl, Jozu, who had been voluntold by Marco, and Haruta, the 12th Division commander, a compact bundle of energy with a sword too big for their frame and an enthusiasm for reconnaissance that bordered on pathological. The island was wrong. Not dangerous wrong. Not even creepy wrong, though the Florian Triangle fog certainly tried its best to set the mood. It was structurally wrong. Fundamentally wrong. The rocks were made of a material that didn't exist in the Grand Line, a pale, smooth stone that hummed faintly when Harry touched it, resonating with his magic like a bell. The vegetation was temperate, oaks and elms and plants that belonged in a northern European forest, not a tropical sea. And the structures that had appeared over the past 3 months were unmistakably, undeniably, 100% not from this world. Stone circles. Tall, weathered-looking megaliths arranged in precise geometric patterns, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when you looked at them from different angles. Harry had seen a lot of strange scripts in his time. The Grand Line was lousy with ancient languages, from poneglyph text to Scythian runes to whatever the hell the Shandians carved on their walls, but this was different. This script crawled. It moved. Like the symbols were alive, swimming across the stone surface in patterns that almost resolved into something readable before dissolving back into abstract shapes. Anyone else seeing the squiggly things move? Haruta asked, squinting at a pillar from approximately 2 inches away. Or did I eat something weird for breakfast? They're moving, Harry confirmed. He reached out and touched one of the symbols, and the world lurched. Not physically. Harry didn't stumble, didn't fall. But something inside him shifted, a tectonic plate of consciousness grinding against another, revealing a stratum of awareness he hadn't known existed. The symbol under his fingers blazed gold, and suddenly he could read it. Not understand it. Reading and understanding were different things, and what the symbols said didn't make sense, not yet. But the shapes resolved into something his magic recognized as language. Letters. Words. Sentences carved in English, Harry breathed. They're in English. But not any English I've ever seen. It's older. Formal. Like a language from another world. Vista suggested mildly, as if this were a perfectly normal thing to say on a Tuesday afternoon. Yeah. Harry's hand was trembling. Not from fear. From recognition. From the bone-deep, cellular-level awareness that whatever had carved these symbols was connected to whatever had put him in a basket and sent him through a crack in reality 18 years ago. Yeah, exactly like that. He pulled his hand away. The symbols faded back to illegibility. The resonance in his magic dimmed to a low hum, still there, still present, but no longer the overwhelming symphony it had been when he was in contact with the stone. We need to go deeper, Harry said. The center of the island. Whatever's generating this energy, it's there. They moved inland. The forest was dense but navigable, the trees growing in unnaturally straight lines that suggested either magical cultivation or the most obsessive gardener in dimensional history. The fog thickened as they went deeper, but Harry's hybrid senses cut through it like searchlights, painting a picture of the island's interior that grew stranger with every step. More stone circles. More carved pillars. And, increasingly, signs of recent activity. Footprints in soft earth, boot prints, narrow and precise, not the wide flat feet of Grand Line travelers. Discarded objects, a tin cup, a piece of cloth, a small glass vial containing a shimmering liquid that Harry's magic immediately identified as similar to itself. Same frequency. Same fundamental nature. Like recognizing a family member by their voice. We're not alone here, Jozu rumbled, his skin already shifting to its diamond form. I count at least 4 different sets of footprints. 5, Harry corrected, his observation hockey extending outward in a focused pulse. 5 people. Clustered together, about 300 meters ahead. And there. He frowned. Scared. They feel scared. Scared of us? Marco asked. No. Scared of the island. Of being here. Harry started walking faster. And there's something else. Underneath the fear. Hope. A lot of it. Like they've been looking for something for a long time and they think they've finally found it. The clearing appeared without warning. One moment they were in dense forest, the next they stepped through a curtain of fog into an open space roughly 50 meters across, perfectly circular, dominated by a stone circle twice the size of any they'd seen so far. The megaliths here were massive, easily 10 meters tall, carved so densely with shifting symbols that they looked like pillars of living text. And in the center of the circle, arranged around a flat altar stone, were 5 people. 5 people who were very obviously not from the Grand Line. They wore robes. Long, flowing, honest-to-God robes, the kind of garment that hadn't been fashionable anywhere in the known world since, well, ever. The robes were in various states of repair, suggesting a long journey, and the people wearing them carried thin wooden sticks in their hands like they were the most natural things in the world to hold. 3 men, 2 women. Ages ranging from mid-20s to, Harry's eyes locked on the oldest member of the group and stopped. The old man was tall. Not Whitebeard tall, nobody was Whitebeard tall, but tall for a normal human, with a long silver beard that cascaded down his chest like a waterfall made of moonlight. He wore half-moon spectacles perched on a crooked nose, and his eyes, blue, bright, twinkling with an intelligence that bordered on unsettling, were fixed on Harry with an expression of such profound, overwhelming relief that it was almost painful to look at. The old man's hand was shaking. The stick he held, no, the wand, some part of Harry's magic whispered, "That's a wand," trembled in his grip. And when he spoke, his voice cracked on the first word like a dam breaking under too much pressure. Harry. 1 word. Just a name. But the way he said it, like a prayer, like an answer, like 20 years of searching distilled into 2 syllables, made every member of Harry's landing party tense. Harry stared at the old man. The scar on his forehead was burning now, not painfully but insistently, pulsing with a recognition that his conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. His magic was going haywire, surging and swirling inside him like a river meeting the ocean, responding to the energy radiating from these 5 strangers with a resonance so deep it felt genetic. "Do I know you?" Harry asked. His voice was steady. His hands were not. The old man took a step forward. One of the women behind him, young, with bubblegum pink hair and a face that couldn't decide between laughing and crying, reached out as if to stop him, but another man, middle-aged with sandy brown hair and scars across his face and the most exhausted eyes Harry had ever seen, gently held her back. "My name," the old man said, and his voice found its footing, became richer, deeper, carrying the weight of authority and age and a sorrow so vast it could have filled the ocean, "is Albus Dumbledore. I am the headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And I have been searching for you, Harry, for 18 years. Silence. The fog curled around the edges of the clearing like a living thing, pressing in, retreating, pressing in again. The stone pillars hummed. Harry's magic hummed in response. And in the space between the Whitebeard pirates and the wizards, 18 years of separation hung in the air like a held breath. Marco broke the silence first. Because Marco always broke silences first, it was his job, his role, the thing the crew counted on him for. When everyone else was stunned or confused or emotional, Marco was the one who opened his mouth and said the thing that needed saying. "You are." He stepped forward, positioning himself slightly ahead of Harry. Not in front of, Marco knew better than to get between Harry and something Harry was focused on, but ahead, a subtle declaration of intent that any experienced fighter would read instantly. "I'm here. I'm watching. Choose your next move carefully. You've been searching for our brother for 18 years. That's a long time. So I'm sure you'll understand if we have some questions before we let this conversation go any further. Dumbledore's eyes shifted to Marco, and something flickered in those blue depths, an assessment, quick and thorough and deeply practiced. The old man was reading Marco the way Marco read battlefields, cataloging threats, measuring power, calculating odds. Whatever he saw made him nod, slowly, a gesture of respect that felt genuine. Of course. I would expect nothing less from those who clearly care for Harry. Dumbledore's gaze returned to Harry, and the relief was back, drowning out everything else. But I must ask, Harry, do you know who you are? Do you know where you came from? I know exactly who I am, Harry said, and his voice had found that particular frequency, low, calm, absolutely immovable, that meant he was done being surprised and had entered the part of the conversation where he was in control. I'm Harry Newgate. Son of Edward Whitebeard Newgate. Commander of the Whitebeard Remnant Fleet. I was born somewhere else and ended up here when I was a baby. That's the summary. The summary. Dumbledore's smile was sad. Ancient. The smile of a man who had rehearsed this conversation in his head 10,000 times and was finding the reality far more complicated than any rehearsal. Yes, I suppose it is. But the full story, Harry, the story of who you were before you were Harry Newgate, is considerably longer. Then start talking. Harry crossed his arms. The quake power hummed through his body, a constant low vibration that made the air around him shimmer faintly. Not a threat display, just a fact. I am what I am. Deal with it. You've got my attention. Don't waste it. They talked for 3 hours. Dumbledore did most of the talking, with occasional interjections from the others, who introduced themselves as Remus Lupin, the Scarred Man, Nymphadora Tonks, call me Tonks, if you call me Nymphadora I'll hex you, Kingsley Shacklebolt, a tall, dark-skinned man with a voice like a bass drum and an aura of calm competence, and Hestia Jones, quiet, watchful, the kind of person who noticed everything and said little. They sat on the altar stone and the surrounding megaliths, 2 groups facing each other across a gap that was measured in more than meters. Harry listened. He listened to the story of a boy named Harry Potter who was born to James and Lily Potter in a world where magic was organized, codified, taught in schools. He listened to the prophecy, the prediction that a child born at the end of July would have the power to vanquish a Dark Lord named Voldemort. He listened to the night of October 31st, when Voldemort came to Godric's Hollow and killed James and Lily Potter, and then tried to kill their son, and the curse rebounded, and the magical backlash tore a hole between worlds. He listened to 18 years of searching. Dumbledore's face growing older with each passing year. Spells that pointed to nowhere. Tracking charms that led to dead ends. The gradual, horrible realization that Harry wasn't just missing, he was in another dimension, a place that magic couldn't easily bridge, separated by barriers that even the most powerful wizard in the world couldn't breach alone. Until the barriers started thinning. The dimensional walls between our worlds have been weakening for several years, Dumbledore explained, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes never leaving Harry. We don't fully understand why. But approximately 6 months ago, the weakening reached a point where limited travel became possible. We've been establishing bridgeheads, anchor points like this island, to stabilize the connection and allow passage. You built this island? Jozu asked, frowning. Not built. Summoned. Called forth from the dimensional boundary itself. Dumbledore gestured at the stone circles. These structures are resonance anchors. They attune the local reality to frequencies that exist in both worlds, creating a stable zone where the dimensional walls are thin enough to cross. It's tremendously complex magic, and it required, you crossed dimensions to find one kid? Haruta interrupted, looking genuinely incredulous. That's a lot of effort for one person. Dumbledore's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. Something that made Harry's observation hockey ping, not danger, exactly, but calculation. The old man was choosing his next words very, very carefully. Harry is not just one person. He is the subject of a prophecy that concerns the fate of our entire world. The Dark Lord Voldemort was not destroyed that night 18 years ago, he was diminished, reduced to a wraith, but not killed. He has spent the intervening years rebuilding his power, and he has now returned to full strength. The prophecy states that Harry is the only one who can defeat him permanently. There it was. Harry felt it land, not the words themselves, but the weight behind them. The expectation. The need. This old man hadn't crossed dimensions out of love or concern or the simple human desire to find a lost child. He'd crossed dimensions because he needed a weapon, and Harry was it. Marco felt it too. Harry could tell by the way the Phoenix's posture shifted, a micro-adjustment, shoulders squaring, weight settling onto his back foot. Combat stance. Not aggressive, but ready. So let me make sure I've got this straight, Harry said, and his voice had gone very, very quiet. The kind of quiet that the crew knew to be cautious around, because Harry Newgate was loud when he was happy and loud when he was angry but quiet when he was thinking, and Harry thinking was more dangerous than Harry punching. I'm from your world. Got it. My birth parents were murdered by a dark wizard. Tragic. Genuinely tragic, I feel that, and I'm not dismissing it. But you didn't come here to deliver a family history lesson. You came here because you need me to fight your war. Dumbledore opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. It is, more nuanced than that. It always is. Harry leaned forward, elbows on his knees, green eyes locked on blue. Here's what I know, Dumbledore. I know that the man who raised me, the man I call my father, spent his entire life protecting people. Not because of prophecies. Not because destiny told him to. Because it was right. Because the strong should protect the weak, and family stands together, and you don't need a magical prediction to know that some people in this world need someone standing between them and the darkness. He stood up. The air around him vibrated, just faintly, just enough to make the fog swirl away from him in spirals, just enough to make the ground tremble beneath the wizard's feet. My father died 2 years ago. He died standing. He died without a single scar on his back, because he never ran from anything. And the last thing he told me was to live free. Harry looked at Dumbledore with an expression that held no anger, no hostility, but absolutely zero compromise. I'm not your weapon. I'm not your prophecy boy. I'm not, Harry Potter, the boy who lived. I'm Harry Newgate, and the only person who gets to decide what I fight for is me. Silence. Lupin was staring at Harry with an expression that mixed grief and wonder in roughly equal proportions. Tonks had tears running down her face but was grinning, which was a facial configuration Harry wouldn't have thought possible. Kingsley and Hestia were exchanging looks that communicated entire paragraphs of silent conversation. And Dumbledore was smiling. Not the sad smile from before. Something brighter. Something that looked almost like pride. You sound, the old man said softly, very much like your mother. The words hit Harry in a place he didn't know was vulnerable. Below the quake. Below the hockey. Below the pirate training and the battle-hardened exterior and the years of growing up among the strongest crew on the ocean. Somewhere deep, somewhere small, somewhere that had never quite stopped wondering, my mother. The question escaped before Harry could catch it, and he hated the way his voice cracked on the word. Lily Potter. Lupin spoke for the first time in nearly an hour, and his voice was gentle in the way that only someone who had practiced gentleness as a survival mechanism could manage. She was extraordinary. Brilliant. Kind. Fierce in ways that had nothing to do with magical power and everything to do with the size of her heart. She had your eyes, Harry. Exactly your eyes. Or rather, Tonks added, sniffling, you've got hers. Harry's hand went to his face, touching the skin beneath his right eye, as if he could feel the genetic connection through his fingertips. His mother's eyes. He'd never known that. Never had anyone to tell him. Whitebeard had called them sea glass green and told him they were the color of the ocean in shallow water, and that had been enough. But knowing they came from someone, from a woman who died protecting him, who threw herself between death and her child, whose sacrifice had been so powerful it cracked the walls between worlds, "Tell me about her," Harry said, and his voice was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Not thinking quiet. Vulnerable quiet. The quiet of a 19-year-old who had lost one father and just learned he'd had a mother who loved him enough to die. Lupin smiled. It was the first genuine smile Harry had seen from the man, and it transformed his face from tired to warm, from scarred to kind. "Sit down," Lupin said. "This might take a while." They talked until sunset. Lupin told Harry about Lily, her laugh, her temper, the way she could demolish an argument with 3 sentences and a raised eyebrow. He told Harry about James, reckless, arrogant, the kind of man who grew into his better self because a woman he loved demanded nothing less. He told Harry about the Marauders, about Hogwarts, about a world where magic was as common as breathing and just as essential. Dumbledore told Harry about the prophecy in more detail, the exact wording, the circumstances of its making, the way it had shaped the course of a war. He was more transparent than Harry expected, answering questions directly instead of wrapping them in riddles, and Harry's observation hockey confirmed that the old man was being largely truthful. Largely. There were gaps, places where Dumbledore's emotional signature flickered with the particular quality of someone choosing which truths to share and which to hold back, but the core story held together. Voldemort. Horcruxes, pieces of the Dark Lord's soul, torn off and hidden in objects, making him effectively immortal. The prophecy linking Harry to Voldemort's defeat. The scar on Harry's forehead, which, wait. Harry held up a hand. "You're saying the scar is a Horcrux?" Dumbledore's face aged 10 years in a single second. "I believe so. When Voldemort's killing curse rebounded, a fragment of his soul, unstable, damaged by the act of murder, latched onto the only living thing in the room. You." The world went very still. Harry touched his scar. That thin white line he'd carried his entire life, the thing he'd felt pulsing in the darkness, the splinter of ice behind the lightning bolt. He'd told Pops about it. Pops had said, "The darkness doesn't define you. What you do with the light around it does." "I felt it," Harry said. His voice was flat. Controlled. The kind of control that meant he was keeping something enormous locked behind his teeth. "Since I was a kid. Something cold. Something that doesn't belong to me. I always thought it was just leftover trauma. A scar from whatever happened to me before Pops found me." "It is a connection to Voldemort," Dumbledore said, each word careful. "A fragment of his soul, embedded in your scar. It may have granted you certain abilities, perhaps influencing your magical sensitivity, your capacity for legilimency or emotional perception, my observation hockey." Harry's eyes widened. "You think the soul fragment is boosting my observation hockey?" "I think the connection between you and Voldemort operates on a level that transcends any single magical system. In our world, it would manifest as a psychic link, shared visions, the ability to speak Parseltongue, the language of snakes. In this world, filtered through whatever training and abilities you've developed, it may express itself differently. Can it be removed?" The question hung in the air. Dumbledore's silence lasted approximately 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds contained a novel's worth of emotional content. Grief. Guilt. Resignation. And underneath it all, so deep Harry almost missed it, relief. Relief that Harry had asked the question, relief that he wouldn't have to be the one to bring it up. "There are ways," Dumbledore said carefully. "None of them simple. None of them without risk. You were gonna ask me to die." It wasn't a question. Harry read it in the old man's emotional signature like reading a book in large print. The original plan, the plan Dumbledore had spent 18 years building toward, had involved Harry sacrificing himself. Walking to Voldemort. Letting the Dark Lord kill him, destroying the Horcrux in the process. A noble death. A necessary death. The greater good. Dumbledore flinched. Actually flinched, like Harry had slapped him with the words. I don't. Harry's voice hardened. Not angry. Just done. Don't lie. Don't hedge. Don't wrap it in philosophy. You came here looking for a kid you could raise as a sacrifice. A weapon you could point at Voldemort and fire. You found a man instead, and now your plan doesn't fit anymore, and I can see you recalculating behind those stupid half-moon glasses. Am I wrong? Another silence. Longer. Deeper. The kind of silence that reputations die in. No, Dumbledore said finally. You are not wrong. The plan I conceived, years ago, in the depths of desperation, did involve your sacrifice. It was the only method I could envision for destroying the Horcrux in your scar. But nothing. Marco's voice cut through the clearing like a blade, and when Harry looked at his brother, the Phoenix's eyes were blazing. Not with fire, with fury. Cold, controlled, absolutely lethal fury. You came here to collect a child you lost and send him to die. That was your plan. It was a plan born of 18 years of searching and the knowledge that an unkillable Dark Lord was building an army. I don't care if he was building a Death Star. Marco stepped forward, and his Phoenix flames ignited, not fully, not combat level, but enough to bathe the clearing in flickering blue light. You don't get to decide who lives and dies for your cause. Not here. Not with my brother. Dumbledore looked at Marco. Looked at the blue flames. Looked at the First Division commander of the Whitebeard pirates, a man who had fought admirals and emerged intact, a man who had survived Marineford, a man whose eyes carried the weight of every brother and sister he'd buried and the ironclad determination to never bury another. You are right, Dumbledore said quietly. And I am sorry. Harry blinked. Of all the things he'd expected the old wizard to say, a direct, unqualified apology wasn't high on the list. The plan was wrong, Dumbledore continued. I knew it was wrong when I conceived it, and I have known it every day since. I told myself it was necessary, that the fate of an entire world outweighed the life of one boy. But standing here, looking at the man that boy became, I see the lie in that calculus more clearly than I ever have. He met Harry's eyes. No twinkle. No calculation. Just an old man confronting the full, ugly weight of what he'd been willing to do. I will not ask you to die, Harry. I came here to find you, and I have found you, and you are more than I ever imagined. I will ask you to help. Not as a weapon. Not as a sacrifice. As yourself. Whatever that means, however you choose to define it. The clearing went quiet. Even the fog seemed to pull back, giving the moment room to breathe. Harry looked at Dumbledore. Then at Lupin, who had tears on his scarred face. At Tonks, whose hair had shifted from pink to a deep, emotional purple. At Kingsley and Hestia, who stood behind their leader with expressions that said they'd follow this old man through dimensional walls and back but weren't entirely sure they should. Then Harry looked at Marco. The Phoenix's flames had died down. His expression was unreadable, which, for Marco, was itself a message. He was leaving this one to Harry. Not because he didn't care, but because he respected Harry enough to let him make his own choices. I need time, Harry said. I need to think about this. All of it, the Horcrux, Voldemort, the prophecy, everything. You can stay on this island. My crew will bring supplies. But I'm not giving you an answer today. Dumbledore nodded. Of course. And Dumbledore? Yes. Harry's expression was serious. Grave, even. The face of a man who had learned the hard way that trust was earned in inches and lost in miles. If I find out you're manipulating me, if I find out there's something you're not telling me, something that changes the equation, I will crack this island in half and drop you back through whatever dimensional hole you crawled out of. We clear. The old wizard's eyes widened slightly. Not in fear, in recognition. He was seeing something in Harry that reminded him of someone. Multiple someones. Lily's fire. James's steel. And underneath both, something that belonged to neither Potter parent but to a man Dumbledore had never met. A man who had raised this boy. A man whose shadow Harry wore like armor. Crystal clear, Dumbledore said. The walk back to the ship was quiet. Not awkward quiet. Thinking quiet. Processing quiet. The kind of quiet that a crew who knew their captain well enough to read his moods recognized as, give him space but stay close. Vista walked point, his twin swords out and gleaming, more out of habit than necessity. Jozu brought up the rear, diamond skin reflecting the dying light. Haruta flitted between the group like a nervous sparrow, opening their mouth to say something approximately 17 times and closing it every single time. Marco walked beside Harry. Close enough to reach. Far enough to give him room. They were halfway to the shore when Harry stopped. I have a piece of a dark wizard's soul in my head. He said it flat, factual, like he was reading a weather report. A dark wizard from another dimension. Who killed my birth parents. And who apparently can't be permanently destroyed unless that piece is removed from me. Yep, Marco said. An 150-year-old man crossed dimensional barriers to find me, originally planning to send me to my death, and is now apparently having a crisis of conscience about it. That's the gist, you are. And my mother died protecting me with a love so powerful it shattered the walls between worlds. Seems like it. Harry was quiet for another 10 steps. Then, my life is really weird, Marco. Kid, you were raised by the strongest man in the world on a ship full of superpowered pirates in an ocean that doesn't follow the laws of physics. Weird has been your baseline since day one. Harry laughed. It was short, sharp, and not entirely stable, but it was a laugh, and Marco visibly relaxed at the sound of it. What do you think I should do? Harry asked. Doesn't matter what I think. It matters to me. Marco stopped walking. Turned to face Harry fully. The fog swirled around them, and the blue flames at the edges of Marco's form cast dancing shadows across the forest floor. I think you already know what you're gonna do. I think you knew the second that old man said the word Voldemort. I think you knew when he told you there's a piece of evil living in your scar. I think you knew when you found out your mom died to save you. Harry's jaw tightened. And what's that? You're gonna help them. Marco's expression was equal parts exasperation and affection, the exact face of a big brother watching his little brother make a decision that was absolutely right and absolutely terrifying in equal measure. Because that's who you are, you are. Not because of prophecies or destiny or some old wizard's master plan. Because you're Whitebeard's son, and Whitebeard's sons don't walk away from people who need them. Even if it means fighting a war that isn't mine. Was Marineford your war? Marco asked quietly. Or was it Ace's? Was it Pop's? Did you hesitate for even 1 second before sailing into the most heavily fortified base in the world to save your brother? Harry didn't answer. He didn't need to. You're not going because Dumbledore asked you to, Marco continued. You're going because there's a madman terrorizing a world full of people who can't stop him, and you've got the power to do something about it. The prophecy is irrelevant. The Horcrux situation is something we'll figure out. What matters is whether you can sleep at night knowing you could have helped and chose not to. I can't, Harry admitted. I know. Marco clapped him on the shoulder. And for the record? I'm coming with you. Non-negotiable. Don't even start. Harry opened his mouth to argue, saw the look on Marco's face, and closed it. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. Thanks, brother. Don't thank me. Just don't get killed, you are. I promised Pops I'd keep you idiots alive. 3 days passed. 3 days of preparation, planning, and careful diplomacy between two groups who regarded each other with mutual fascination and mutual wariness. The Whitebeard remnant set up a supply line to the island. The wizards, to their credit, didn't just sit around being mysterious, they contributed, using magic to expand the living spaces, purify water, and conjure, out of thin air, which made Haruta lose their mind, additional supplies. Lupin turned out to be an excellent cook, which immediately endeared him to the crew. Tonks accidentally turned her hair the same color as Marco's phoenix flames during dinner one night, which led to a surprisingly intense debate about whether blue fire was objectively cooler than regular fire. It was fun. If you ignored the existential dimensional war stuff, it was actually kind of fun. And on the evening of the third day, something happened that Harry hadn't expected. A ship appeared on the horizon. Not a marine ship. Not a pirate ship. A small, fast vessel flying a flag Harry didn't recognize, a skull wearing a straw hat, sailing directly toward the island with a confidence that suggested its occupants either didn't know about the Florian Triangle's reputation or didn't care. Straw hats, Marco said, watching the approaching ship through a spyglass. Monkey D. Luffy's crew. They're in the area, makes sense, given their route through the New World. But why are they coming here? The answer arrived 20 minutes later in the form of a woman stepping off the straw hat ship's gangplank and walking up the beach like she owned every grain of sand her feet touched. Nico Robin was not what Harry expected. He'd heard of her, of course. Everyone in the Grand Line had heard of Nico Robin, the Devil Child, the sole survivor of O'Hara, the woman the world government had put a bounty on when she was 8 years old because they were afraid of what she knew. The woman who could read poneglyphs. The most dangerous archaeologist in the world. But, hearing about someone and standing in front of them were different experiences entirely, and Harry discovered this fact in the space between one heartbeat and the next. She was tall, not as tall as him, but close, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders and eyes the color of a cloudless sky over deep water. She carried herself with a stillness that wasn't passive but controlled, the stillness of someone who had learned early in life that the world was watching and had decided to watch it right back. Her expression as she surveyed the island, the stone circles, the gathered Whitebeard remnants, and the robed wizards was one of calm, detached academic interest. Until her eyes found the carved symbols on the megaliths. Then her expression changed. Not dramatically. Nico Robin didn't do dramatic. But something ignited behind those blue eyes, a spark of recognition, of hunger, of the particular obsessive excitement that only scholars and archaeologists and people who had dedicated their lives to understanding the past could produce. These symbols, she said, and her voice was like her posture, controlled, measured, with depths that her surface calm only hinted at. They're not from any known script in this world. They're not poneglyph text. They're not Scythian or Shandian or any ancient language I've catalogued in 20 years of research. She reached out and touched one of the pillars, and unlike Harry, the symbols didn't glow for her. But she read them anyway, or tried to, her eyes moving across the shifting shapes with an intensity that bordered on ferocious. They're from outside. You can tell that just by looking. Haruta asked, impressed despite themselves. I've read every known script in this world. Robin's voice carried no boastfulness, just fact, the way someone might note that the sky was blue. These symbols belong to none of them. The structural grammar, the character formation, the way they interact with the surrounding stone, everything about them suggests a fundamentally different linguistic origin. A different world's linguistic origin. She turned from the pillar and her gaze swept across the group until it landed on Harry. And stopped. Later, Harry would try to describe what happened in that moment and fail. It wasn't attraction, or rather, it wasn't just attraction, though that was there too, undeniable and immediate and inconvenient. It was recognition. Not the superficial kind, she didn't know his face, his name, his history. It was a deeper recognition, the kind that operated below conscious thought. The recognition of one person who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves from the wreckage looking at another person who had done exactly the same thing. She saw something in him. He saw something in her. And in the space between them, in that charged air that smelled like salt and fog and ancient stone, something began. "You're the Whitebeard commander," Robin said. "Not a question. The one they call Quake's son. The boy Whitebeard raised from infancy. Harry Newgate." He extended his hand. Casual. Normal. Absolutely not thinking about the way the fog was curling around her hair like it was trying to frame her face. "And you're Nico Robin. The devil child. The woman who can read the language of the world." Her eyebrow rose, just a fraction, just enough to indicate amusement. "That's a more poetic description than I usually receive. Most people stop at devil child. Most people are idiots." The eyebrow climbed higher. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, Robin didn't give those away easily, but the shadow of one. The promise that a smile existed somewhere nearby and might appear if properly motivated. Perhaps. She took his hand. Her grip was firm, her skin warm, and Harry's magic, that stupid, inconvenient, absolutely unhelpful magic, surged in response to her touch, not aggressively but curiously, reaching toward her like a cat investigating a new person. "I came here to investigate the energy anomalies. My captain has a talent for sailing toward the most dangerous and interesting things in any given ocean. But I suspect this is more than just an anomaly." "You could say that." Harry released her hand, tucking his own into his pockets to prevent any further magical reconnaissance that his power apparently wanted to conduct without his permission. "There are people here from another dimension. Wizards. Actual wizards, with wands and robes and a whole other world on the other side of a dimensional crack." Robin's composure, that carefully maintained scholarly calm, cracked. Just for a moment. Just a flash of something that looked like a child being told that Santa Claus was real and also that he had a PhD in ancient history. "Show me," she said, and the two words carried more raw enthusiasm than anything Harry had heard her say so far. He grinned. Couldn't help it. The expression felt natural in a way that surprised him. It had been a long time since he'd grinned at someone who wasn't crew, someone who wasn't already part of his carefully guarded circle of trust. "Follow me." Robin spent 4 hours with the wizards, and by the end of it, Harry was pretty sure Dumbledore had never been so thoroughly interrogated in his 150 years of existence. She was relentless. Not aggressive. Robin didn't need aggression. She had something more devastating, genuine intellectual curiosity backed by 20 years of archaeological expertise and a mind that processed information the way most people breathed. She asked about the structure of magic in the wizarding world, about the history of wandcraft, about the relationship between magical and non-magical populations, about the etymology of spell incantations, about the theoretical framework underlying transfiguration and whether it related to the molecular restructuring properties of certain paramecia-type devil fruits. Dumbledore, to his credit, kept up. Barely. By the third hour, Lupin had given up following the conversation entirely and was sitting with Marco, bonding over the shared experience of being the responsible person in a group of maniacs. Tonks was teaching Haruta how to change her hair color, which Haruta found absolutely delightful. Kingsley and Vista had discovered they shared a love of tea and were having a quiet, civilized conversation that stood in stark contrast to the intellectual tornado happening 10 meters away. Harry watched from a distance, ostensibly reviewing charts with Jozu but actually watching Robin work. The way she processed information was mesmerizing, not just absorbing it but connecting it, building frameworks in real time, finding patterns that even Dumbledore hadn't considered. "The Poneglyph connection is unmistakable," Robin said, standing before one of the stone pillars with her arms crossed, her sprouted extra hands, devil fruit power. Harry had learned, the Hana no Mi, the flower fruit, which let her sprout body parts from any surface, which was simultaneously the most useful and the most unsettling ability he'd ever encountered, holding multiple books and scrolls from Dumbledore's collection simultaneously. These symbols share structural DNA with ancient Poneglyph text. Not the same language, but the same family. As if both scripts evolved from a common ancestor. That would suggest a connection between our worlds that predates recent events, Dumbledore mused. A historical relationship between dimensions. The Void Century. Robin's eyes narrowed. The two words carried weight. Harry could hear it, could feel it through his observation hockey. These words meant something to Robin on a level that went beyond academic interest. Personal. Deep. The kind of meaning that people built their lives around. 800 years ago, something happened in this world that the world government erased from history. 100 years of records, destroyed. Every scholar who studied them, hunted. Every civilization that preserved them, annihilated. Her voice was steady, but her hockey signature pulsed with old, deep pain. O'Hara. Her home. The scholars. The fire. What if the Void Century involved contact between our worlds? What if the world government's greatest secret isn't just about this world's history, but about a connection to yours? Dumbledore was very quiet for a very long time. That, he said finally, is a profoundly unsettling hypothesis. The best ones usually are. Harry smiled. He didn't mean to, it just happened, slipping onto his face like a wave cresting a shore. There was something about the way Robin engaged with the world, this combination of fierce intelligence and controlled passion, wrapped in a composure so practiced it was almost architectural, that made him want to lean in. Not physically, though, yes, also physically, he was 19 and had eyes, but attentionally. She was the kind of person who made you want to pay attention, because every sentence she spoke contained 3 layers you wouldn't notice if you blinked. She caught him watching. Because of course she did, Robin noticed everything, it was literally her job, her survival mechanism, her art form. Their eyes met across the clearing, and Robin's expression shifted by approximately half a degree, an adjustment so subtle that anyone without Harry's hybrid observation hockey would have missed it entirely. Not a smile. Not an invitation. More like an acknowledgement. I see you seeing me. That's interesting. Let's see what you do with it. Harry raised his cup of tea. Kingsley had conjured an excellent pot, in a casual salute. Robin's eyebrow twitched upward. She turned back to her research, but there was a new quality to her posture. An awareness that hadn't been there before. A consciousness of being observed by someone who might actually be worth being observed by. Jozu, standing next to Harry, watched this entire exchange with the expression of a man who had seen 16 brothers and sisters go through the early stages of attraction and had learned to recognize the symptoms the way a doctor recognizes a rash. Oh no, Jozu said quietly. To no one in particular. Because no one would listen anyway. That evening, Harry found Robin on the beach. She was sitting on a rock at the waterline, her shoes beside her, her feet in the surf, reading a book by the light of a small magical lamp that Dumbledore had lent her. The Florian Triangle fog had thinned with the sunset, revealing a sky scattered with stars that neither world could fully claim, a hybrid sky for a hybrid place, this island between dimensions. Harry sat down next to her. Not close. Not far. The exact distance that said, I'm here if you want company but I'll leave if you don't. Robin didn't look up from her book. But she didn't ask him to leave, either. They sat in silence for several minutes. The ocean whispered. The stars burned. Harry's quake power hummed through his body at its resting frequency, a low, constant vibration that he'd learned to live with, like a second heartbeat, like the background music of his existence. You're vibrating, Robin said, still not looking up. Yeah. Sorry. It's a quake thing. I can try to, don't apologize. It's soothing, actually. Like being near a cat's purr. She turned a page. If the cat could shatter continents. Harry laughed. Surprised, genuine, startled out of him by the deadpan delivery. Robin's mouth curved, still not quite a smile, but closer than anything he'd seen from her all day. Can I ask you something? Harry said. You just did. Can I ask you another something? Now the smile appeared. Small, controlled, but real. Go ahead. O'Hara. He said the word carefully, like handling something fragile. I know what happened. Everyone does, the Buster Call, the scholars, the world government's purge. You were 8. You survived alone. He paused. I was 1.5 when I lost my first world. Found by Pops when I was still in diapers. I don't remember anything from before, no parents, no home, no. Nothing. Just the scar. Robin's eyes finally left the book. She looked at him, really looked, not with the analytical gaze she directed at the wizard's artifacts but with something more personal. More present. Why are you telling me this? She asked. No deflection. No armor. Just a direct question from someone who'd been lied to and manipulated enough times to value directness above almost everything else. Because I think we speak the same language, Harry said. Not literally, though the fact that I can apparently read ancient magical text is a whole thing we should probably explore at some point. I mean the other language. The one that people who've lost their homes and found new ones learn to speak. The language of, I chose this life. I chose these people. I wasn't born into this family, I picked it, and it picked me, and that makes it more real, not less. Robin was very still. The ocean moved around her feet. The lamplight made her eyes look darker, deeper, like pools that went all the way down. The scholars of O'Hara were my family, she said. Her voice was steady, but underneath it, in that place Harry's hybrid senses could reach, there was a tremor. Not weakness. Vulnerability. The kind that takes more strength to show than to hide. Professor Clover. The library. The sound of pages turning in quiet conversations about history. I lost all of that in one day. Everything I loved, burned. A pause. And then I spent 20 years running. Trusting no one. Using people before they could use me. Telling myself I didn't need a home because homes could be taken away. What changed? Robin looked out at the ocean. The fog was almost gone now, and the horizon stretched away into darkness, infinite and unknown and full of possibility. A boy made of rubber punched a god in the face to save me, she said. And told me he wanted me to live. And I realized that running from the possibility of loss is just another way of losing. Harry felt something shift in his chest. Not his quake. Not his magic. Something quieter. Something that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with connection, the recognition that this woman, this brilliant, guarded, quietly fierce woman, had walked a road so similar to his own that their paths might as well have been parallel lines finally converging. Pops used to say that the one treasure he always wanted was a family, Harry said. Not one piece. Not power. Not territory. Just, people. People who called each other brothers and sisters and meant it. People who'd sail into a war to save one of their own. He looked at Robin. I think the old man was onto something. Robin studied him. Her expression was unreadable, that carefully constructed composure back in place, shields raised, analytical mind processing. But underneath, in the emotional landscape that Harry's observation hockey painted in colors and temperatures, something was warming. Slowly. Cautiously. Like a fire being lit in a hearth that had been cold for a long time. You're surprisingly thoughtful for someone with the power to crack planets, she said. And you're surprisingly warm for someone the world government calls a devil. The smile returned. Wider this time. Genuine. And Robin did something that Harry suspected she didn't do often, she closed her book. Set it aside. Gave him her full, undivided attention, which was like being examined by the world's most perceptive microscope and the world's most comfortable blanket simultaneously. Tell me about Whitebeard, she said. Not the legend. Not the strongest man in the world. Tell me about the man who found a baby in a basket and decided to be his father. So Harry told her. He talked about Pop's laugh, that gururara, that shook the ship and the ocean and the sky, that made you feel like the world was a joke, only the old man was in on and he was generous enough to share the punchline. He talked about the way Pops held his sake cup, delicately, pinched between two fingers that could crack mountains, like the cup was the most precious thing he owned. He talked about training sessions where the strongest man in the world would sit in his chair and gently correct a child's hockey stance with the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon. He talked about Marineford. About watching his father die. About the silence that came after, the horrible, echoing silence where Pop's laugh used to be. Robin listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer platitudes or condolences or any of the empty words that people typically reached for when confronted with grief. She just listened. Present. Attentive. Bearing witness. When Harry finished, the stars had wheeled halfway across the sky, and the ocean had gone from whisper to murmur to something that sounded almost like a lullaby. "He sounds like someone worth missing," Robin said softly. "He was the best man I ever knew." Harry's voice cracked on the last word, and he didn't try to fix it. Didn't try to be strong or stoic or any of the other things that people expected from the son of an emperor. He just let the crack exist, let the grief breathe for a moment, because Robin had created a space where that felt safe. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for listening." They sat on the beach as the night deepened, two people from different crews and different lives and different species of loneliness, watching the ocean do what the ocean always does, stretch toward the horizon, carrying everything and everyone toward whatever comes next. The next morning, everything went to hell. Harry was in the middle of a training session, practicing his quake control, trying to produce vibrations precise enough to shatter a specific rock in a pile without touching the others, when his observation hockey screamed. Not warned. Screamed. The kind of sensory alarm that only triggered when the incoming threat was massive, immediate, and hostile enough to light up his entire perceptual range like a Christmas tree made of violence. Contact. Harry's voice cracked across the island like a whip, and 20 years of pirate discipline kicked in across the camp. The Whitebeard remnants went from relaxed to combat ready in under 4 seconds, weapons drawn, positions taken, hockey flaring. Marco erupted into full phoenix form, blue flames roaring skyward. Vista's twin swords materialized in his hands like they'd been waiting for this. Josu's entire body shifted to diamond, the transformation faster than thought. The wizards were slower, but not by much. Dumbledore's wand was in his hand before the echoes of Harry's shout faded, and the air around the old man changed texture, thickening with magical energy so dense it was almost visible. Lupin dropped into a combat stance that spoke of decades of practice. Tonk's hair blazed red, actual red, anger red, war red, and her wand came up with a fluidity that said, "Horror," louder than any badge. The straw hat ship, anchored offshore, came alive. Harry's observation hockey picked up the crew scrambling, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, the rest, moving to battle stations with the practiced efficiency of people who fought for their lives approximately once a week. "What is it?" Marco demanded, hovering above the tree lean, his phoenix eyes scanning the horizon. Harry's senses were reaching, stretching, probing the approaching threat. It was coming from the east, no, from beyond the east. From outside. From the dimensional crack itself. Something was pushing through the barrier between worlds, and it was dark, Harry breathed. His scar was burning now, not the warm pulse of recognition but actual burning, a sharp, vicious pain that drove into his skull like a heated nail. The Horcrux. The soul fragment. It was resonating with whatever was coming through, vibrating at a frequency that matched the darkness approaching like a key matching a lock. Something dark is coming through the barrier. Something from the other world. Voldemort? Dumbledore's voice was sharp. Alert. The twinkle was gone from his eyes, replaced by something cold and bright and deadly. This wasn't Dumbledore the teacher. This was Dumbledore the war leader. Not him. But his people. Harry's observation hockey painted the picture in vivid, terrible detail. A force. Organized. Disciplined. 20, no, 30, no, 50 individuals pushing through the dimensional wall, carrying wands and dark magic and something else. Something mechanical. Something that Harry's senses recognized from Marineford with a sick lurch of déjà vu. They've got pacifistas, Harry said, and his voice went flat in the way that only a veteran of the worst war in recent memory could manage. Modified pacifistas. At least 6 of them. And they're wrapped in. I don't know what that energy is, but it's making my scar want to explode. Dark magic, Dumbledore said grimly. Voldemort has been experimenting with fusing your world's technology with our magic. We intercepted intelligence about the program months ago but didn't know how far it had progressed. Well, now we know. Harry cracked his knuckles. The air around his fists shattered, literally shattered, fracture lines appearing in the atmosphere that glowed with the combined black and gold of hockey magic. They picked the wrong island to attack. Harry. Robin's voice, calm and precise, cut through the rising tension. She was standing at the tree lean, her arms crossed, eyes tracking the eastern horizon with that analytical clarity that nothing could shake. If these pacifistas are anything like the ones I've encountered, brute force alone won't be sufficient. They're designed to absorb and redirect kinetic energy. Adding dark magic to their systems likely enhances that capability. So I can't just punch them really hard. You can. But you'd be feeding their power loop. Robin's eyes met his. You'll need to be surgical. Target the joints, the power cores, the magical augmentations. Disrupt the systems rather than trying to overwhelm them. Harry stared at her for a beat. Then he grinned, wide, fierce, the grin of someone who'd just been given exactly the tactical framework they needed. You're brilliant, you know that. Yes, Robin said simply. I do. Marco, hovering above them, caught Vista's eye. The 5th Division commander stroked his mustache and raised an eyebrow. Marco responded with the faintest possible head shake, which in the complex nonverbal language of the Whitebeard pirates translated roughly to, yes, I see it. No, we're not talking about it now. We have enemies to kill. The dimensional barrier to the east split open like a wound in the sky. And through it poured Voldemort's advance force. They were Death Eaters. Harry had never seen Death Eaters before, hadn't even heard the term until 3 days ago, but the aesthetic was unmistakable. Black robes. White skull masks. An aura of malice so concentrated his magic recoiled from it like a hand from a hot stove. They emerged from the dimensional rift in formation, wands raised, spells already crackling at their tips, dark curses, Harry's magical senses told him, designed to kill, maim, and control. And behind them, striding through the rift like ancient gods of war, came the pacifistas. Modified didn't begin to cover it. The standard pacifista was a cyborg monstrosity, human-sized, laser-equipped, programmed to target pirates with mechanical precision. These were something else entirely. Twice the size of standard models, their bodies wrapped in pulsing veins of dark purple energy that Harry recognized with a sick certainty as dark magic. The laser ports in their mouths had been replaced with something organic-looking, something that glowed with the same malevolent energy as the Death Eater's curses. And their eyes, flat, mechanical, expressionless, had been given an upgrade that made Harry's blood run cold. They tracked targets with intelligence. Not the pre-programmed pattern recognition of a standard pacifista, but actual tactical awareness. They were thinking. Oh, that's not good, Thatch's voice crackled through the den mushy from the Whitebeard's will, anchored offshore. Those things are thinking, Harry. Since when do pacifistas think? Since someone strapped dark wizard magic to their processors, apparently. Harry dropped into combat stance, his quake power surging, the ground beneath his feet cracking in anticipation. All hands, defensive formation. Protect the non-combatants. Marco, air superiority. Vista, Jozu, take the flanks. On it, Yuwa. The Whitebeard remnants moved like the war machine they were, 2 decades of experience fighting the Grand Line's worst translated into smooth, practiced coordination. Marco went high, phoenix flames roaring, engaging the first wave of Death Eaters with aerial strikes that sent them scattering. Vista and Jozu hit the flanks simultaneously, Vista's swords carving through dark curses like they were made of paper, Jozu's diamond body simply absorbing the spells that hit him, the dark magic shattering against his crystalline surface. The wizards joined the fight, Dumbledore leading, and sweet merciful seas, the old man could fight. The wand in his hand moved like an extension of his will, casting spells that Harry's magic recognized as fundamentally similar to his own powers but structured differently, shaped by centuries of accumulated magical knowledge into precise, devastating tools. A shield charm that blocked 3 simultaneous killing curses without flickering. A transfiguration that turned the ground beneath a cluster of Death Eaters into quicksand. A stunning spell that moved so fast it was essentially lightspeed, catching a Death Eater mid-curse and dropping him like a puppet with cut strings. Lupin fought with a ferocity that seemed at odds with his gentle demeanor, moving with an animal grace that Harry's observation hockey identified as not entirely human, something Lupin, something predatory, a controlled savagery that made his spells hit harder and his reflexes react faster. Tonks was a whirlwind, her body shifting as she fought, hair changing color with every spell, form flickering between shapes, making her almost impossible to target. She caught a Death Eater's curse on a shield, returned fire with a hex that made the man's legs turn to jelly, literally, they wobbled and sloshed, and hooped with a battle joy that Haruta found deeply relatable. But the pacifistas were the real problem. Robin had been right. The dark magic augmentation had made them adaptive. When Jozu hit one with a diamond-coated punch that should have caved its chest in, the pacifista absorbed the kinetic energy, its dark magic veins flaring purple, and redirected it back as a beam of concentrated force that sent Jozu skidding backward 30 meters. "They're learning!" Jozu shouted, planting his feet and bracing. "Each hit makes them stronger." Harry was already moving. Quake step, the air beneath his feet vibrated, and he teleported 30 meters forward, appearing directly in front of the nearest modified pacifista. It turned toward him, its augmented eyes tracking, its mouth opening to fire. Robin's words echoed in his mind. "Surgical. Target the joints, the power cores, the magical augmentations." Harry didn't punch it. Instead, he placed his palm flat against the pacifista's chest, gently, almost delicately, and vibrated. Not a quake. Not a tremor. A vibration, focused, precise, calibrated to a frequency that his magic told him would disrupt the dark magical conduits running through the machine's body. The vibration traveled through the pacifista's chassis, found the nodes where dark magic connected to mechanical systems, and shook them apart. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. The dark magic veins pulsed, flickered, and shattered like overloaded circuits. The pacifista's eyes went dark. Its body seized, twitched, and toppled forward like a felled tree, smashing into the ground with a crash that Harry felt through the soles of his boots. 1 down. 5 to go. That's how you do it. Harry shouted, adrenaline and battle joy surging through him. Target the magic nodes. Vibrate, don't smash. The tide turned. The Whitebeard remnants adapted, they always adapted, it was what made them the most feared crew on the ocean even in their diminished state. Vista used his sword techniques to slice through the dark magic conduits with surgical precision, his blades finding the gaps in the pacifista's armor that Harry's observation hockey mapped for him across the battlefield. Jozu stopped trying to overpower the machines and instead used his diamond form to grapple them, holding them in place while other fighters targeted the weak points. And the wizards, God, the wizards were something else when they had pirate support. Dumbledore's spells, directed at targets Harry's hockey identified, were devastating. Lupin and Tonks fought back-to-back, covering each other's blind spots with a practice that spoke of years of partnership. Kingsley moved through the battlefield like a shadow made of purpose, his spells quiet and efficient and absolutely lethal. The Straw Hat crew joined from the seaside, and that was when the battle stopped being difficult and started being unfair. Monkey D. Luffy hit a pacifista with a Gear 4th Kong gun that sent it flying 300 meters into the ocean. Roronoa Zoro cut through a wave of Death Eaters with a single three-sword technique that left them unconscious and regretting their career choices. Sanji kicked a Death Eater so hard the man's mask shattered and his dignity followed shortly after. Harry carved through the battlefield, and something inside him was singing. Not the quake. Not the magic. Something deeper. The joy of battle, not violence for its own sake, but the fierce, primal satisfaction of using everything you had, everything you trained for, everything your father and your brothers had taught you, to protect the people who mattered. Every quake step put him exactly where he needed to be. Every hybrid strike, hockey magic quake fused into devastating precision, disabled another enemy, dropped another threat, protected another comrade. He reached the last pacifista at the same time as Robin. She was already engaging it, arms sprouted from its shoulders and back, trying to find purchase on the mechanical joints, while additional arms sprouted from the ground beneath it, gripping its legs, trying to immobilize it. The pacifista was fighting back, its dark magic flaring against Robin's holds, trying to burn her conjured limbs away. Harry arrived in a burst of vibrating air, slid under the pacifista's swinging arm, and came up on its blind side. Robin saw him, those blue eyes, sharp and focused even in the chaos of battle, and understood instantly. Now, she called. Her arms wrenched. The pacifista stumbled, its balance disrupted for one crucial second. Harry placed both palms on its back and poured everything he had into the vibration. Quake. Magic. Hockey. Three powers harmonized into a single devastating frequency that traveled through the machine's body like a chord played on an instrument the size of a continent. The pacifista came apart. Not exploded, disassembled. Every bolt, every weld, every dark magic connection separated simultaneously, the machine dissolving into its component parts like a puzzle being gently taken apart by invisible hands. The parts cascaded to the ground in a rain of metal and dying purple light. Harry and Robin stood in the wreckage, panting, surrounded by the detritus of a battle that had lasted 12 minutes and felt like 12 hours. Their eyes met. Robin had a scratch on her cheekbone, a small one, barely bleeding, probably from a deflected curse. Her hair was disheveled. Her composure was, for once, genuinely cracked, not broken, never broken, but showing the seams, revealing the woman underneath the armor. You're good at this, she said. Takes one to know one, Harry replied, and the grin that split his face was equal parts adrenaline and something warmer. Something that had no business appearing on a battlefield but showed up anyway, because feelings didn't care about appropriate timing. Robin's scratched cheek dimpled. Just barely. Just enough. Around them, the battle wound down. Death Eaters were being subdued, restrained, interrogated. The dimensional rift they'd come through was closing, sealing itself with a sound like tearing silk played in reverse. The Whitebeard remnants were securing the island. The wizards were casting protective wards. The Straw Hats were doing, whatever Straw Hats did after battles, which seemed to involve Luffy demanding meat and everyone else ignoring him. But in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by the broken remains of dark magic pacifistas, Harry Newgate and Nico Robin stood looking at each other with the particular expression of two people who had just fought side by side and discovered that they fit together like pieces of a puzzle neither had known they were part of. Marco, landing nearby, saw the expression. Sighed. I give it 2 weeks, he muttered to Vista. Vista stroked his mustache. 1. You're both wrong, Jozu said. It already happened. They just don't know it yet. The aftermath of the attack changed everything. The leisurely pace of, let's think about this and make a careful decision, evaporated like fog in sunlight. Voldemort wasn't waiting. Voldemort was already here, not personally, not yet, but his forces were in this world, his technology magic hybrids were operational, and his advanced team had found Harry on the first try. He's tracking you, Dumbledore said gravely, examining the residual dark magic from the pacifistas. Through the Horcrux. The soul fragment in your scar is a beacon, wherever you go, he can find you. So we remove it, Harry said. It's not that simple, make it that simple. Harry's voice was steel. You've had 18 years to figure this out. You're the most powerful wizard in your world. Figure it out. Dumbledore looked like he'd been slapped. Then he looked like he deserved it. Then he nodded, a short, sharp nod that carried more determination than all the flowery speeches he'd ever given. I will need resources. References. Access to materials from our world that I didn't bring on this expedition. Make a list. I'll get you whatever you need. Harry turned to Robin, who was examining the disassembled pacifista components with an archaeological fervor that bordered on indecent. Robin. Those dark magic modifications, can you reverse engineer them? Figure out how they're fusing magic with technology. Robin looked up. Her eyes were bright with the particular hunger of a scholar given access to an entirely new field of study. Given sufficient time and access to both magical and mechanical expertise, yes. The fusion methodology is crude but effective. Understanding it would give us a significant tactical advantage. Then you're staying with us. If your captain agrees. Luffy-san will agree. Robin said it with the absolute confidence of someone who knew her captain's decision-making process, which could be summarized as, is it an adventure? Then yes. He'll want to be involved himself, but his attention span for research is approximately 11 seconds, so he'll likely sail ahead and trust me to handle the academic work. I want to coordinate the intelligence effort, Marco said, stepping into the planning circle with the practiced ease of someone who had been managing logistics for a 1,000-person crew since before Harry could walk. If Voldemort has forces in this world, we need to know where they are, what they're doing, and who they're working with. The old world government infrastructure might be fragmented, but there are still power brokers who'd love a new dark magic weapon supplier. Agreed. Harry looked around the circle, his brothers, the wizards, Robin, the disparate group of people who had been brought together by circumstances so improbable they made the Grand Line's weather look predictable. We're building an alliance. Pirates, wizards, straw hats, whoever else wants in. Voldemort is playing a cross-dimensional game, and we're going to beat him at it. You sound like Pops, Vista said, smiling beneath his mustache. Harry touched the tattoo on his forearm, Whitebeard's Jolly Roger, permanent and proud. I learned from the best. That night, Harry stood alone on the beach. Not really alone, his observation hockey told him that Marco was on the ship, that the crew was scattered across the island, that the wizards were in their camp, that Robin was 50 meters behind him in the tree line, reading by lamplight. But functionally alone, standing at the waterline with his feet in the surf, looking up at the hybrid sky of this island between worlds. Two worlds. Two identities. Two sets of parents, one who gave him life and died to protect it, one who found him in a basket and chose to love him. Two kinds of power, magic from a world he'd never seen and quake from a man who'd shaped his soul. Two wars, one already fought and lost, Marineford, Ace, Pops, one approaching like a storm on the horizon. His scar throbbed. The Horcrux. A piece of the darkest wizard in existence, lodged in his head like a splinter of poisoned glass. His quake power hummed. The legacy of Edward Newgate, the ability to shake the world, carried by a boy who'd been told his entire life that power was a tool and love was the blueprint. His magic swirled. The birthright of Lily and James Potter, the gift of a mother's sacrifice, the energy of a world he'd never known but was apparently born to save. Harry Newgate. Harry Potter. Quake's son. Boy who lived. Whitebeard pirate. Chosen one. I'm just a guy on a beach, he said to the ocean. A guy on a beach who's apparently supposed to save two worlds. The ocean didn't answer. It never did, not directly. But the waves rolled in and rolled out, steady and constant, the way they'd been rolling since before humans existed and would keep rolling long after they were gone. And in that constancy, Harry heard something that might have been Pop's voice, or might have been his own, or might have been the sound of the universe itself giving him the only advice that ever mattered. One wave at a time, son. One wave at a time. Behind him, unseen, Robin lowered her book. She'd been watching him, not intrusively, not analytically, but with the soft attention of someone recognizing a kindred spirit in a moment of vulnerability. The lamplight caught the concern in her eyes, and the curiosity, and something else that she filed away carefully in the part of herself that she showed to no one. She went back to her book. She'd talk to him tomorrow. Or he'd talk to her. Or they'd find each other again the way they kept finding each other, naturally, inevitably, like the tide finding the shore. The stars turned. The fog crept back in. The island between worlds held its breath. And somewhere, in another dimension, in a dark room in a dark fortress, a man with no nose and red eyes sat before a table spread with maps of a world he intended to conquer, and smiled. "The boy lives," Voldemort said, tracing a finger across the dimensional charts his Death Eaters had provided. "And he has power. More power than I anticipated. The Quake ability is intriguing." "My lord," Bellatrix Lestrange breathed from the shadows, "the advance force was destroyed. All 50 operatives, captured or killed. The modified pacifistas, were a test, Bellatrix." Voldemort's smile widened, and it was the kind of smile that made Bellatrix, who feared nothing in any world, shiver. "I wanted to see what the boy could do. And now I know." He stood. Moved to the window. Beyond the glass, the dimensional barrier shimmered, thin, growing thinner, the wall between worlds wearing away like stone under water. "He has the Quake. He has the magic. He has allies, friends, the sentimental bonds that weak men mistake for strength." Voldemort's red eyes reflected in the glass, burning in the darkness like coals. "But he also has my soul in his head. My anchor. My key." He turned from the window. His wand was in his hand, Phoenix Feather Core, 13.5 inches, and beside it, strapped to his other forearm, was something that didn't belong in the wizarding world. A device. Mechanical. Pulsing with the same dark purple energy as the modified pacifistas. Voldemort had not simply allied with this other world's technology. He had adopted it. "Prepare the main force," Voldemort said. "We're crossing in full." "And the boy, my lord?" Voldemort's smile was the last thing to fade from the room as the darkness swallowed him. "The boy will come to me. He has no choice. The Horcrux will sing to him, Bellatrix. It will sing, and he will follow, and when he arrives at my door, oh, when he arrives, a laugh. High. Cold. The sound of cruelty refined into an art form. He will learn what it means to face a true Dark Lord." The dimensional barrier trembled. Both worlds held their breath. And the war, the real war, the one that would shake the foundations of reality itself, began to take shape in the space between. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 4, The Will of D. Voldemort was bleeding. Not the way normal people bled, red and warm and human. The fluid leaking from the gash Harry's Quake punch had torn across the Dark Lord's chest was black, viscous, cold enough to frost the air around it. It moved with intent, crawling back toward the wound like it was trying to return home, because even Voldemort's blood had been corrupted by decades of dark magic and soul mutilation into something that barely qualified as biological. He was hovering 300 meters from Harry, suspended by levitation magic, his robes torn and his composure cracked for the first time in years. The seastone augmentation in his body pulsed with an angry violet light, trying to compensate for the damage, trying to repair the fractures that Harry's unified Quake had driven through his defenses. Harry hung in the air opposite him, standing on a platform of compressed atmosphere that his Quake power maintained without conscious effort. His body hurt, the Horcrux extraction had taken more out of him than he'd anticipated, leaving a raw emptiness behind his scar where the soul fragment had lived for 18 years. Like a tooth being pulled. The socket was clean, the infection was gone, but the nerve endings were still screaming. He didn't care. The pain was a small price for what he'd gained, silence. For the first time in his life, the only voice in Harry's head was his own. No dark whisper. No cold presence lurking behind his consciousness. No unwanted tenant in the architecture of his soul. Just Harry. Just the ocean and the sky and the war below and the enemy in front of him. It was the most liberating feeling he'd ever experienced. "You destroyed it," Voldemort said. His voice had changed, lost its theatrical confidence, its predatory purr. What remained was something rawer. Something that sounded almost like the orphan boy from the London slums that Tom Riddle had been before he became a monster. "The Horcrux. You actually destroyed it." "Vibrated it out of existence," Harry confirmed. "Turns out, dark magic has a resonant frequency just like everything else. You just need to find it and push past the breaking point." "That should not be possible." Voldemort's wand hand was trembling, minutely, almost invisibly, but Harry's observation hockey caught it with crystal clarity. The Dark Lord was running calculations. Reassessing. The comfortable certainty he'd carried into this battle, the certainty that the boy who lived was a predictable variable, a weapon to be countered, a problem with a known solution, had been shattered along with the Horcrux. No magic in our world can destroy a Horcrux without basilisk venom or fiend fire. "What you did, isn't from your world," Harry finished. "That's the part you never figured out, Tom. You crossed dimensions to build an army. You grafted sea stone into your body to counter devil fruit users. You modified pacifistas with dark magic. You did all this brilliant, horrible work to weaponize the intersection of two worlds. But you never understood the intersection itself." Harry raised his hand. The unified frequency manifested visibly, not as an attack, but as a demonstration. Gold and black and white energy swirled around his fingers in a helix pattern, three forces woven so tightly together they were indistinguishable. Magic from one world. Quake from another. Hockey from the spirit that bridged both. "This isn't magic plus devil fruit," Harry said. "It's something new. Something that exists only because both worlds touched, and I grew up in the space between them. You can't counter it with sea stone because it's not a devil fruit. You can't block it with shield charms because it's not a spell. You can't analyze it and adapt because it's not a technique, it's me. And I am not a problem you can solve." Voldemort's crimson eyes narrowed. The trembling stopped. And something shifted behind those inhuman irises, a recalculation so fundamental it restructured the Dark Lord's entire approach in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He stopped trying to be clever. He started trying to survive. The duel resumed with a violence that redefined the word. Voldemort abandoned finesse. Abandoned strategy. Abandoned the surgical, precise magical combat that had characterized the first phase of their fight. What replaced it was raw power, the accumulated magical force of a century of study and practice and soul-rending sacrifice, unleashed without restraint, without control, without any consideration for collateral damage. He didn't cast spells. He cast cataclysms. A wave of fiend fire, cursed flame, semi-sentient, devouring everything it touched, erupted from Voldemort's wand in a torrent that was less spell and more act of nature. The fire took the shape of a serpent 100 meters long, its body made of screaming flame, its eyes burning with the same crimson as its creators. It lunged at Harry with a speed that defied physics, its jaws opening wide enough to swallow a ship. Harry met it head-on. His unified frequency hit the fiend-fire serpent like a tuning fork striking a bell. The cursed fire had a frequency, everything did. Harry had learned that lesson from Robin and confirmed it through experience, and that frequency was chaotic, discordant, a screaming jumble of destructive intent bound together by dark magical will. Harry didn't try to overpower the chaos. He harmonized with it. Found the underlying structure beneath the screaming, the architectural spine that held the fiend fire together, and vibrated it at exactly the right frequency to make the entire construct resonate itself to pieces. The serpent of cursed flame came apart from the inside out. Not extinguished, deconstructed, its fire separating into component energies that Harry's unified field redirected, scattered, and neutralized. The heat vanished. The malice dissipated. Where 100-meter serpent of all-consuming flame had been, there was now a shower of golden sparks drifting toward the ocean like fireflies. Voldemort didn't pause. A gesture with his offhand, his sea-stone-augmented hand, and the ocean itself answered. Not through devil fruit power. Through sheer magical force, a spell of such magnitude that it grabbed the surface of the sea and lifted it, pulling a wall of water a quarter-mile high into the air and sending it crashing toward Harry like the wrath of Poseidon given form. Harry punched the tsunami. The quake traveled through the water faster than the water traveled toward him, and the wave, that impossible, magically conjured wall of ocean, froze. Not with ice. With vibration. Every water molecule vibrated at a frequency that locked them in place, turning the wave from a destructive force into a suspended sculpture of frozen motion, a quarter-mile of ocean hanging in the air like a photograph of God's anger. Then Harry clenched his fist and the frozen wave collapsed inward, condensing, compressing, the water being squeezed by vibrational force until it occupied approximately the same volume as a basketball. Harry held the compressed sphere of ocean in one hand, millions of gallons of water reduced to a glowing blue orb, and threw it at Voldemort. The Dark Lord's shield caught it. Barely. The compressed water detonated on impact, releasing its stored kinetic energy in a blast that sent Voldemort tumbling backward through the air, his shield flickering, his seastone augmentation flaring as it struggled to process the hybrid energy signature of the attack. They exchanged blows. Curses and quakes. Dark magic and unified frequency. The sky above the battlefield became a light show of green and gold and purple and white, the aftershocks of each clash sending concussive waves across the ocean that rocked ships and rattled teeth for miles in every direction. Below them, the battle raged. Marco was everywhere at once, blue phoenix fire carving through Death Eater formations, healing allies with his regenerative flames, directing the defense with tactical commands that carried over the chaos through Den Mushy and sheer lung power. The 1st Division commander was fighting the battle of his life, and he was fighting it not for victory but for time. Time for Harry. Time for the endgame. Vista, north flanks buckling. Rotate 3rd Division to support. On it, Commander. Jozu, those pacifistas are reforming their network. Break the central node before they relink. Diamond. Jozu's fist, encased in crystalline diamond, drove through the central pacifista with enough force to split it in half vertically. The network flickered, destabilized, and the remaining linked units lost cohesion for critical seconds that the Allied fighters exploited ruthlessly. Lupin and Tonks fought as a unit, the werewolf and the metamorphmagus, an unlikely partnership forged in the crucible of cross-dimensional warfare. Lupin's enhanced senses covered Tonks' blind spots. Tonks' shape-shifting ability created distractions that let Lupin close to striking distance. Together, they were more effective than either could have been alone. Together, they were the best argument Harry had ever seen for the thesis that different worlds could produce complementary strengths. Dumbledore, the old wizard, the centenarian, the man who had crossed dimensions with guilt in his heart and hope in his eyes, was holding the center of the Allied formation with a display of magical power that made Harry's assessment of the man undergo a radical upward revision. The headmaster wasn't just powerful. He was precise. Every spell he cast served multiple purposes, a shield charm that also redirected enemy fire, a disarming spell that also disrupted the nearest pacifista's dark magic conduits, a transfiguration that turned incoming debris into a flock of golden birds that harassed Death Eaters while simultaneously providing cover for advancing Allied fighters. This was magic as an art form. Magic as an expression of intelligence so refined it could solve 5 problems with one gesture. Kingsley Shacklebolt and Haruda had become the Diamond Wand team's spiritual successor, a wizard-pirate partnership that fought with such synchronized efficiency that Death Eaters started avoiding their sector entirely. Kingsley's deep, powerful spells created openings. Haruda's blade work exploited them. They moved like a conversation, call and response, statement and emphasis, question and answer. And Robin was conducting the battle. Not fighting it. Conducting it. From the deck of the Whitebeard's will, she maintained a tactical awareness that encompassed the entire engagement, using her Hana no Mi to sprout eyes across the battlefield, a technique Harry hadn't known she could do until this moment and which was equal parts brilliant and deeply unnerving. She saw everything. Processed everything. And she relayed her observations to the Allied commanders through a communication network she'd established with Tonk's help, a hybrid system of den mushy and magical messaging that gave the good guys something Voldemort's forces didn't have. Omniscience. Marco, Death Eater squad approaching from below the waterline, submersible assault. 12 hostiles. The Phoenix Dove. Blue fire met dark water. 12 hostiles became 12 problems someone else would have to deal with. Vista, the pacifista on your left is adapting to your sword frequency. Switch to the reverse edge technique Harry taught you. Vista's mustache twitched. He reversed his grip, altered his blade angle, and cut through the pacifista's dark magic node from an approach it hadn't been programmed to counter. The machine collapsed. Dumbledore, Bellatrix Lestrange is circling toward the bridge island. She has something in her hand. It's pulsing with dimensional energy. Dumbledore's expression hardened. He apparat, disappeared and reappeared across the battlefield with a crack that split the air, and intercepted Bellatrix 30 meters from the bridge island. Their duel was brief, vicious, and ended with Bellatrix's mysterious device confiscated and the Dark Witch herself wrapped in conjured chains that pulsed with golden light. Robin's eyes, her real eyes, the ones on her face, tracked Harry and Voldemort in the sky. She couldn't help him directly. She knew that. The duel between the boy who lived and the Dark Lord who had unmade him was a confrontation that existed on a level she couldn't reach. But she could ensure that everything around that confrontation went right. She could manage the battlefield so perfectly that when Harry needed an opening, it would be there. She could clear the board so that the final move was his to make. This was her contribution. Not a punch. Not a spell. Not a quake that shattered mountains. A mind that held the entire war in its awareness and guided it toward its conclusion with the same meticulous care she brought to reading ancient texts. It was, in its own quiet way, the most powerful thing happening on the battlefield. Harry was getting hit. Not often. Not cleanly. Voldemort's attacks were being mostly deflected, redirected, or neutralized by the unified frequency. But mostly wasn't the same as completely, and the Dark Lord's century of combat experience meant that he could find angles and timings that slipped past Harry's defenses. A cutting curse caught Harry's left arm, opening a gash from elbow to wrist that bled freely and made his grip unreliable. A concussive hex slipped through a gap in his vibration field and caught him in the ribs, cracking two and sending white-hot pain lancing through his torso with every breath. Harry was also getting tired. The Horcrux extraction had cost him. The sustained use of the unified frequency, maintaining the harmonic integration of three power systems while simultaneously fighting the most dangerous wizard alive, was burning through his reserves at a rate that he could feel, a slow but steady drain on the deepest wells of his energy. He wasn't at his limit yet. But the limit was visible on the horizon, approaching with the patient inevitability of a tide. Voldemort knew it. The Dark Lord had shifted his strategy from trying to overpower Harry to trying to outlast him, maintaining defensive magic while launching probing attacks designed to force Harry to use his unified frequency continuously. It was a war of attrition, and attrition favored the man who had spent a century learning to conserve and redirect magical energy. Harry needed to end this. Soon. He quake-stepped backward, creating distance, buying himself 3 seconds of breathing room. The battlefield stretched below him, chaos and fire and magic and blood, his people fighting and dying and holding the line because they trusted him to finish this. 3 seconds. That's what he had. 3 seconds to find a way to beat a wizard who was older, more experienced, and currently engaged in the patient project of waiting for Harry to run out of gas. In 3 seconds, Harry thought about Robin. Not tactically. Not strategically. He thought about the way she sat on the beach and read by lamplight. The way her eyes crinkled when she was amused. The way she'd said, "I have been needing you for weeks," with her voice steady and her hands shaking and her entire carefully constructed armor set aside because she trusted him enough to be unguarded. He thought about Marco. The brother who kept his promises. The phoenix who burned and never went out. He thought about Pops. The laugh. The sake cup. The hand on his head. He thought about Ace, burning bright. And in the space between those thoughts, in the negative space, the silence, the quiet place where everything he loved lived, Harry found what he was looking for. Not a technique. Not a frequency. Not a tactical solution. A truth. Voldemort's power came from fear. Fear of death. Fear of weakness. Fear of the ordinary, the mortal, the human. Every dark spell he'd ever cast, every Horcrux he'd ever created, every atrocity he'd ever committed was rooted in the same bottomless, all-consuming terror of being nothing. Of dying and being forgotten. Of mattering so little that the world could go on without him. Harry's power came from the opposite. Harry's power came from the absolute, bone-deep, unshakable knowledge that the people he loved would remember him. That his life mattered not because of what he could destroy but because of what he had built, the connections, the bonds, the family that stretched across two worlds and didn't care about the dimensional barriers between them. Harry wasn't afraid of death. He'd watched his father die standing, and in that standing, Whitebeard had shown Harry the only lesson that really mattered: a life lived for others is a life that echoes forever. Voldemort wanted to live forever through Horcruxes. Harry would live forever through the people who loved him. That was the difference. That was the gap between them. Not power, not skill, not magical knowledge. Meaning. Voldemort fought to avoid death. Harry fought to protect life. And in that difference, in that unbridgeable chasm between fear and love, lay the fulcrum that would break this battle. Harry's 3 seconds were up. Voldemort attacked, a barrage of curses designed to force Harry's unified field into overdrive, to drain his reserves, to push him past his limit. Harry didn't defend. He advanced. Quake stepping through the curse barrage, taking hits he would have dodged, absorbing impacts he would have deflected. A slashing curse caught his shoulder. A concussive hex hit his hip. Pain, bright, sharp, real, exploded through his body. He didn't stop. He didn't slow down. He closed the distance between himself and Voldemort with every step, and with every step, the unified frequency changed. It didn't get stronger. It got simpler. All the complex harmonics, the carefully calibrated vibration patterns, the sophisticated fusion of 3 power systems, Harry let them go. Stripped them away. Reduced the unified frequency to its core, its essence, its most fundamental expression. One note. One perfect, ringing, golden note that contained everything Harry was and everything he'd been given. His mother's sacrifice. His father's will. His brother's loyalty. His love's belief. The laughter of a giant with a crescent mustache. The fire of a boy who burned too bright. The steady gaze of a phoenix who never stopped watching. One note that said, "I am here. I am loved. And you cannot take that from me." Harry reached Voldemort. The Dark Lord threw up every defense he had, shields of dark magic, walls of seastone energy, layers of protection that should have stopped anything short of a divine intervention. Harry's fist went through all of it. Not because the punch was more powerful than the defenses. Not because the unified frequency shattered the shields. Not because Harry's quake overwhelmed Voldemort's magic. Because the note Harry was carrying, that single, pure, love-born frequency, resonated with something inside Voldemort that the Dark Lord had spent his entire life trying to destroy. His humanity. Somewhere underneath the Horcruxes and the dark magic and the century of murder and manipulation, Tom Riddle was still human. Still mortal. Still a boy from a London orphanage who had wanted, more than anything, to matter. And that boy, that buried, denied, tortured remnant of a person who might have been decent if the world had been kinder, responded to Harry's note the way a frozen lake responds to the first warmth of spring. It cracked. Harry's fist connected with Voldemort's chest. The sea-stone augmentation shattered, not from force, but from resonance. The dark magic that held it together was fundamentally a structure built on fear, and fear couldn't maintain structural integrity in the presence of a vibration that was built entirely on love. The sea-stone fragments flew outward, trailing dark energy that dissipated like smoke in sunlight. Voldemort staggered. His shields collapsed. His wand arm dropped. And for one frozen, eternal instant, Tom Riddle's crimson eyes flickered, not red, but brown. The original color. The human color. The color of a boy who had been born without love and had decided, in the hollow ache of that absence, that if the world wouldn't give him love, he would make the world fear him instead. What? Voldemort's voice cracked. Broke. Became, for 1 second, the voice of a child who had never been held. What are you, ending it, Harry said. He placed both palms flat against Voldemort's chest. The Dark Lord tried to push him away, physically, magically, with every ounce of power and desperation and terror he possessed. But Harry held on. Because holding on was what Whitebeard's sons did. Because you didn't let go of the people who needed saving, even when the person who needed saving was the person trying to kill you. The unified frequency poured through Harry's palms and into Voldemort's body. Not destructively. Not as an attack. As a vibration, the same vibration Harry had used to heal the training island, to reverse the explosion in Robin's lab, to restore what had been broken. The constructive frequency. The healing note. Except what it was healing wasn't Voldemort's body. It was reaching for his soul. The few remaining Horcruxes, hidden across the wizarding world, protected by curses and concealment, resonated. Harry could feel them through the connection, through the bridge his unified frequency was building between himself and the fragmented remnants of Tom Riddle's soul. A locket. A cup. A diadem. A snake. Scattered across a world Harry had never seen, anchored by dark magic that had held them in place for decades. But anchors have resonant frequencies too. And Harry was vibrating at the exact note that would break them. One by one, across the dimensional barrier, the Horcruxes shattered. Not physically, the objects remained intact. But the soul fragments within them, already weakened by the destruction of the fragment in Harry's scar, already destabilized by Voldemort's proximity to the unified frequency, reached their breaking point. The magic that bound them, dark, desperate, built on murder and fear, couldn't maintain its structure against a vibration that was built on the opposite of everything it represented. In a vault beneath a wizarding bank, a golden cup cracked and a wisp of black smoke screamed into the air and vanished. In a hidden room in a castle, a silver diadem shattered and a dark presence evaporated like dew in the morning sun. In a drawing room in a dark manor, a locket burst open and the fragment within burned away in a flash of golden light that startled the house elf polishing the silverware. And coiled in the corner of that same manor, a massive snake named Nagini convulsed, hissed, and collapsed. The Horcrux within her, the last, the most protected, the fragment closest to Voldemort's heart, fought harder than any of the others. It raged. It screamed. It clawed at the walls of its containment with a ferocity born of absolute survival instinct. Harry's vibration found it anyway. Found its frequency. Matched it. And pushed past the breaking point. The snake went still. The soul fragment dissipated. And across two worlds, the last anchor holding Tom Riddle to immortality dissolved into nothing. Voldemort felt it all. Every Horcrux. Every fragment. Every piece of his shattered soul dying simultaneously, the connections severed, the safeties removed, the insurance policies he'd spent a lifetime creating burned away in a cascade of golden light that left him standing, for the first time since he was 16 years old, as a mortal man. He screamed. The sound was not human. Was not magical. Was not anything that existed in the vocabulary of either world. It was the sound of a being confronting, for the first time in its existence, the full weight of its own mortality. The sound of a man who had spent a century running from death suddenly finding himself standing face to face with it, alone, with no exits and no armor and no way out. Harry stepped back. The unified frequency dimmed to its resting hum. His hands were shaking. His body was battered, cut, bruised, cracked ribs screaming with every breath. But his soul was whole. His mind was clear. And his eyes, when they met Voldemort's, held something that the Dark Lord found more terrifying than any attack. Pity. It's over, Tom. Harry's voice was quiet. Gentle, even. The voice of a man who understood suffering because he'd lived through enough of it to fill a library and had decided, somewhere along the way, that even his enemies deserve compassion. The Horcruxes are gone. All of them. You're mortal. You're human. You're dying, I can feel it. Your body was held together by the soul fragments, and without them, the dark magic that sustained you is eating itself. Voldemort's hands went to his chest. His face, that inhuman, reptilian mask that had replaced the handsome features of Tom Riddle decades ago, was shifting. Not transforming. Deteriorating. The dark magic that had reshaped his appearance was failing, and underneath it, like a painting being cleaned of centuries of grime, a human face was emerging. Not a kind face. Not a redeemed face. The face of a man who had chosen cruelty and power and fear over connection and warmth and love, and who was now confronting the consequences of that choice in the most personal way possible. He was aging. Rapidly. The artificial youth that the Horcruxes had sustained was evaporating, and the years, all 70 of them, were catching up with a vengeance. His skin wrinkled. His hair, absent for decades, returned in patches of gray and white. His body, sustained by dark magic that was now consuming itself, began to fail. No, Voldemort whispered. His wand fell from fingers that were shaking too badly to hold it. No, I cannot, I am Lord Voldemort, I am immortal, you're Tom Riddle, Harry said. And you're dying. And I'm sorry. He meant it. Standing there, watching the most feared wizard in history crumble before him, Harry felt a sorrow that had nothing to do with the battle and everything to do with waste. The waste of a brilliant mind turned to destruction. The waste of a powerful magic twisted to dominance. The waste of a human life that could have been extraordinary in so many ways and had been used, instead, to spread pain. Voldemort collapsed. His knees hit the dark energy platform, which was itself destabilizing now that its creator's power was failing. He looked up at Harry with eyes that were brown, fully brown, the crimson gone, the slits rounded back to human irises, and in those eyes was something that Tom Riddle had not felt since he was a boy in an orphanage, alone and afraid and wondering why no one wanted him. Vulnerability. I don't want to die, Tom Riddle whispered. Harry looked down at him. At this broken, aging, dying man who had murdered thousands, who had torn his soul to pieces, who had killed Harry's parents and tried to kill Harry himself and had crossed dimensions to build an empire of fear. And Harry thought about what Pops would do. Not the strongest man in the world. Not the Emperor of the Sea. Just Pops. The man who found a baby in a basket and chose love. The man who built a family out of people the world had rejected. The man who believed, with the unshakable conviction of a mountain, that everyone deserved the chance to be more than their worst moments. Harry knelt. He knelt in front of Tom Riddle, not before him, not in submission, but beside him, at eye level, and he spoke with the voice of a son carrying his father's will. Everyone dies, Tom. That's not the tragedy. The tragedy is dying without ever having been loved. Harry's hand, the hand that could crack continents, the hand that had just destroyed every Horcrux in existence, settled gently on the old man's shoulder. You chose fear because you never knew anything else. You built empires of darkness because the light was too scary. And now you're dying, and you're alone, and you're afraid. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that no one ever showed you another way. Tom Riddle stared at him. The vulnerability in his eyes was enormous, an ocean of it, vast and deep and terrifying because it had been locked behind walls of dark magic and cruelty for 70 years and was now flooding out all at once. You pity me, Tom said. Not a question. An accusation. Or trying to be one. But the venom was gone. The malice was gone. What remained was just, a man. Old. Dying. Small. Yeah, Harry said. I do. Tom's face contorted, not with anger but with something more complex, more painful. A lifetime of choices that couldn't be unmade. A mountain of regret so massive it had its own gravity. I could have. Tom started. Stopped. Started again. There was a moment. When I was young. When I first felt magic. I thought. His voice faded. The dark energy platform was dissolving beneath them, its structural magic failing as its creator's power ebbed. I thought I could be someone worth knowing. You could have been, Harry said. In another life. With different choices. But that life is gone, Tom. And this one is ending. The platform dissolved. They were falling, slowly, gently, the air beneath them responding to Harry's quake power, lowering them toward the ocean like an elevator made of compressed atmosphere. Tom Riddle, the most feared wizard of his age, rode toward the water in the arms of the son of the man he tried to kill, held upright by a strength that had nothing to do with muscles and everything to do with mercy. They touched down on the surface of the ocean. Harry's quake power vibrated the water beneath them into a solid platform, a disk of frozen sea that held them above the waves. Around them, the battle was dying. Death Eaters, seeing their master fall, were surrendering in droves, throwing down wands, raising hands, the fanaticism draining out of them as the dark marks on their arms faded and flickered like dying embers. The remaining pacifistas, their dark magic power source failing as Voldemort's influence waned, were shutting down one by one, toppling into the ocean like abandoned chess pieces. Tom Riddle looked at the sky. The crimson was fading from the sunrise, the dimensional distortion easing as the massive dark magical presence that had been pressing against the barrier weakened. Normal colors were returning, blue and gold and the soft pink of dawn, the real dawn, the one that came every morning regardless of who lived or died or fought or fell. It's beautiful, Tom said softly. I spent so long trying to conquer the world that I never stopped to look at it. Harry didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He just sat with the dying man on a platform of frozen ocean, surrounded by the wreckage of a battle that had determined the fate of two worlds, and watched the sunrise with someone who was seeing it for the last time. Tom Riddle's eyes closed. His breathing slowed. The last traces of dark magic in his body flickered, sputtered, and went out. He died quietly. Without drama. Without spectacle. Without the theatrical immortality he had spent his life pursuing. Just a man, dying at dawn, with the sound of the ocean in his ears and the light of the sunrise on his face. Harry sat with him until it was done. Then he stood up, looked down at the body that had once been the most feared wizard alive, and said the only words that seemed right. Rest, Tom. You earned it. The ocean sighed. The sunrise brightened. And somewhere, in the spaces between worlds, the damage that Tom Riddle's fear had done began, slowly and imperceptibly, to heal. The aftermath was controlled chaos. 312 Death Eaters surrendered. 47 were captured by force. 16 escaped through the closing dimensional breach before it sealed, a problem for the future, but not for today. The modified pacifistas, deprived of their dark magic power source, were inert metal, some sinking to the ocean floor, others floating like dead whales, all of them being catalogued and collected by Robin's research teams for analysis. Allied casualties were lighter than anyone had dared hope. 12 dead, 7 Whitebeard remnants, 3 wizards, 2 Straw Hat crew members, Chopper and Frankie, who threw themselves in front of a dark magic blast aimed at the Sunny and were both alive but badly injured. 41 wounded, ranging from minor to critical. 0 division commanders lost. 0 wizard leadership lost. It was, by any objective measure, a decisive victory. It didn't feel like one. Victories never did, Harry reflected. Not real ones. Real victories came with body counts and hospital tents and the faces of the people who didn't make it staring at you from the backs of your eyelids every time you closed your eyes. Real victories tasted like salt water and smelled like blood and sounded like the silence that fell over a battlefield when the last spell was cast and the last quake faded and the only sound left was the ocean going about its business as if nothing had happened. Harry moved through the aftermath like a ghost wearing a commander's coat. He checked on the wounded. Spoke to the doctors. Confirmed the casualty list with Marco, who read the names in a voice that was steady and flat and absolutely breaking underneath. 7 Whitebeard remnants. 7 brothers and sisters who had sailed with them since before Marineford, who had survived the worst day in pirate history only to fall here, on an island between worlds, fighting an enemy from a dimension they'd never heard of 6 months ago. Coda. The researcher from Robin's lab. He'd been 23. Harry memorized every name. Added them to the list he carried in his heart, the list that started with Ace and Pops and would never stop growing because that was the price of being someone who loved people in a world that was constantly trying to take them away. He found Robin in her research space, surrounded by pacifistic components and dimensional equipment, her hands busy but her eyes distant in the way they got when she was processing something emotional and using work as a buffer. He sat down next to her. She didn't look up. He didn't ask her to. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then Robin set down the component she was examining, turned to Harry, and kissed the corner of his jaw, a brief, precise, deliberate gesture that communicated approximately 17 different things, all of them essential. "You came back," she said. "Promised I would." "You did." She examined his face, the cuts, the bruises, the dark circles under his eyes. Her hand came up and touched the scar on his forehead, tracing the lightning bolt with a finger that was gentle in a way that contrasted sharply with the hands that had been disassembling war machines 30 seconds ago. "How does it feel?" "Quiet." Harry leaned into her touch. "It's quiet in there. For the first time in my life, it's just me." "Good." She withdrew her hand. Picked up the pacifistic component. Went back to work. "You should sleep. In a bit. Now, Harry. There's still, Marco has the aftermath. Dumbledore is handling the prisoners. Vista is coordinating repairs. The battle is over and you have been awake for 31 hours, you have 2 cracked ribs, a laceration on your left arm that needs proper medical attention, and you are running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness." She looked at him over the pacifistic component with an expression that blended concern with the particular firmness of a woman who had survived 20 years of being the smartest person in any room and was not inclined to argue with people who were being stupid. "Sleep. Now." Harry opened his mouth to argue. Then he looked at Robin's face, really looked, with the observation hockey that could read emotional states like text, and saw the worry underneath the composure. The fear she hadn't shown during the battle. The relief that she was only now allowing herself to feel, expressed not through tears or declarations but through the fierce, practical insistence that he take care of himself. "Yeah," he said softly. "Okay." He slept for 14 hours. When he woke up, Robin was still working. And there was a blanket over him that hadn't been there when he fell asleep. The days that followed were filled with the unglamorous reality of victory, logistics. The dimensional breach needed to be stabilized and sealed. The Death Eater prisoners needed to be secured and arrangements made for their return to the wizarding world for trial. The modified pacifistas needed to be studied, understood, and either neutralized or repurposed. The Allied force needed to be debriefed, reorganized, and prepared for the possibility that Voldemort's followers who had escaped might attempt to continue their master's work. And the wizarding world needed to be told what had happened. Dumbledore handled the communication across the dimensional barrier, establishing a temporary portal using the Bridge Island's resonance anchors. The first message he sent back was simple, practical, and would eventually become the most famous communication in wizarding history: the Dark Lord is defeated. Harry Potter lives. He is not coming home. He is home. The reactions from the other side were mixed. Some people celebrated. The war was over. The monster was dead. The boy who lived had fulfilled the prophecy, even if he'd done it from another dimension using powers that no wizard could explain or replicate. Others were confused. The boy who lived was a pirate. He'd been raised by a giant. He had a devil fruit power. He was in a relationship with an archaeologist from a pirate crew. The narrative they'd built around Harry Potter, the orphaned hero, the chosen one, the wizard who would save them, didn't fit the reality of who Harry actually was, and the cognitive dissonance was giving the wizarding world a collective headache. And a few people, a small, vocal, annoying few, demanded that Harry come home. That he return to the wizarding world, take his place in magical society, attend Hogwarts, at 19, which would have made him the most overqualified student in the school's history, and generally behave like the hero they'd imagined rather than the person he actually was. Harry's response, relayed through Dumbledore, was characteristically direct: I appreciate the invitation. My family is here. My life is here. If the wizarding world ever needs help, they know where to find me. But I'm not leaving. This ocean is my home, these people are my family, and the man who raised me taught me that home isn't where you're born, it's where you're loved. I'm loved here. End of discussion. Lupin delivered this message personally, traveling back through the portal with tears in his eyes and a smile on his scarred face. He's James and Lily's son, all right, Lupin told the assembled Order of the Phoenix, who had gathered to hear news of their long-lost savior. Stubborn as a mule and twice as opinionated. They'd be proud. Tonks, standing beside him with her hair cycling through every color in the rainbow, added, he's also the single most terrifying person I've ever met, and I once arrested a man who could turn into a swarm of bees. If you want him back, you're welcome to try. I recommend body armor. The wizarding world, gradually and with considerable grumbling, accepted the situation. Harry Potter, Harry Newgate, was not their hero. He was his own. And the world he'd chosen was not the world they'd chosen for him. Dumbledore stayed longer than the others. The old wizard spent 2 weeks on the Bridge Island, working with Harry on dimensional theory, helping stabilize the barrier between worlds, and generally making himself useful in the quiet, competent way of a man who was trying to atone for decades of mistakes through present action rather than past regret. On his last night before returning through the portal, Dumbledore found Harry on the beach. Their beach, Harry and Robin's beach, though Harry had ceded it for the evening when he saw the old wizard's expression. I owe you an apology, Dumbledore said without preamble. No twinkling. No cryptic metaphors. Just an old man, standing in the starlight, speaking plainly for perhaps the first time in his long, complicated life. You already apologized. On the first day. I apologized for the plan. For intending to use you as a weapon. Dumbledore sat on Robin's rock with the careful movements of a man who was acutely aware of both his age and his fallibility. I haven't apologized for the loss. For the years you should have had in our world. The parents you should have known. The childhood you should have lived. I had a childhood, Harry said. It was full of pirates and ocean and a father who could make the sea laugh by laughing at it. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I know. And that makes it both better and worse. Dumbledore's blue eyes, tired, kind, carrying the weight of 150 years of trying to do the right thing and frequently getting it wrong, met Harry's green ones. You are an extraordinary person, Harry. Not because of the prophecy. Not because of your powers. Because of who you are, the choices you've made, the people you love, the man you've become. I claim no credit for that. All credit belongs to the people who raised you. Pops, Harry said. Marco. The crew. They made me. And your parents made you too, in their way. Lily's sacrifice didn't just protect your life, it planted something in you. A capacity for love so vast that even the darkest magic in existence couldn't corrupt it. I watched you offer compassion to Voldemort as he died. I watched you sit with a man who murdered your parents and treat him with dignity in his final moments. Dumbledore's voice wavered. Lily would have done the same. She was, in the end, the bravest of all of us. Not because she fought, because she chose love over fear, even at the cost of everything. Harry's throat tightened. He looked at the ocean, that infinite, patient, endlessly moving body of water that had been his companion since childhood. Tell me more about her, he said. When you get back. Send letters. Send stories. I want to know everything about both of them, my birth parents. Not because I wish I'd grown up with them instead of Pops. But because they're part of me too, and I don't want that part to be blank. Dumbledore smiled. A real one. The kind that had nothing behind it except simple human warmth. I will send you everything I have. Photographs, letters, memories. We have a device called a pensieve that can store and replay memories. I'll send you one with every memory of James and Lily I possess. He stood, brushing sand from his elaborate robes. And Harry? Yeah. The dimensional barrier is healing, but it will never fully close. The two worlds are connected now, permanently. There will be traffic. Travel. Exchange. People from our world will want to visit yours, and vice versa. The era of isolation between dimensions is over. Good. Harry grinned, that wide, fierce, Whitebeard grin that carried the old man's warmth in every curve. Tell them they're welcome. But if they start any trouble on my ocean, they'll answer to me. Dumbledore laughed. Actually laughed, a sound so rare from the old wizard that the nearby guards jumped. You sound exactly like your father, Dumbledore said. Which one? Both. The old wizard walked away toward the portal. At the edge of the dimensional gateway, that shimmering curtain of light that connected two worlds, he turned back one final time. Goodbye, Harry Newgate. Thank you for everything. See you around, Dumbledore. Harry raised a hand. And hey, send that pensieve. Dumbledore stepped through the portal. The light shimmered, fluctuated, and settled into its resting state, a quiet hum, a thin place in the wall between worlds, a doorway that would remain cracked open forever. Harry stood on the beach and watched the portal glow, and for a moment, just a moment, he let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. Two worlds. Two identities. Two sets of parents. A war fought and won. A dark wizard defeated. A soul fragment removed. A future opening up before him like an ocean with no horizon. Then Robin appeared beside him, because Robin always appeared beside him, because they had established a gravitational orbit around each other that neither of them had consciously chosen and neither of them wanted to escape. He's gone. Robin asked. Back to his world. He's going to send me memories of my birth parents. That's generous. He owes me about 18 years of birthday presents, so I figure memories are a start. Robin made a sound that might have been a laugh if she hadn't been Robin and therefore constitutionally opposed to laughing at jokes that didn't meet her quality standards. But her eyes crinkled, and that was enough. They stood together on the beach, watching the portal hum and the stars turn and the ocean do what the ocean always does. What now? Robin asked. Harry thought about it. Really thought, the way he always did when a question mattered, turning it over, examining it from every angle, feeling its weight and texture and implications. Now we sail, he said. The war's over. Voldemort's gone. The dimensional barrier is stable. And there's an entire ocean out there that we haven't explored, both of them, actually. 2 worlds worth of islands and adventures and mysteries. 2 worlds worth of poneglyphs. Robin went very still. That particular kind of still that Harry had learned to recognize as the moment before something inside her ignited. 2 worlds worth of poneglyphs, she repeated. I mean, if the dimensional barrier is permanent, then the connection between our world's histories is permanent too. Everything you hypothesized about the Void Century, about the shared linguistic roots between poneglyph text and magical script, that's not just a theory anymore. It's a research program. A lifetime's worth of research. Maybe several lifetimes. Robin turned to face him. Her composure was intact, of course it was. This was Nico Robin, the woman who maintained her composure the way other people maintained their breathing, but underneath it, visible only to Harry's hybrid senses, something was blazing. Not fire. Not excitement, though that was there too. Hope. The hope of a woman who had spent her entire life searching for the truth about the Void Century, who had lost everything and everyone who tried to help her find it, and who was now being offered something she'd never dared to dream of, a partner who understood what the search meant to her and was offering to sail alongside her while she pursued it. You want to help me find the true history, Robin said. Not a question. An observation. Precisely stated, as always. I want to sail with you while you find it, Harry corrected. The finding is your thing. My thing is making sure nobody stops you. That's quite the offer. I've got a fleet. I've got the power to crack continents. I've got connections in 2 dimensions. And I've got a personal interest in understanding the history of the worlds I belong to. Harry met her eyes. Plus, I like being near you. That's not a tactical assessment. That's just a fact. Robin's composure held. Her eyes crinkled. And she did something she almost never did, she reached out first. Took his hand. Interlaced her fingers with his. Initiated the contact rather than responding to it. I accept your offer, she said. On one condition. Name it. You let me name the ship. Harry blinked. Then he laughed, full, open, the kind of laugh that carried across the water and made the stars seem to lean in to listen. Deal. What do you want to call it? Robin's composure finally broke. The smile that appeared wasn't small. Wasn't controlled. Wasn't the carefully rationed expression she typically allowed herself. It was wide and warm and utterly, devastatingly real, the smile of a woman who had spent 20 years building walls and was now, deliberately and without regret, letting them come down. The Moby Dick too, she said. Harry's laughter died. Not because it stopped being funny. Because it became something else, something deeper, something that started in his heart and filled his chest and made his eyes sting and his throat constrict and his quake power hum at a frequency that made the entire beach vibrate gently, like the world itself was purring. Perfect, he said. His voice cracked. He didn't fix it. That's perfect. 3 months later, the Moby Dick 2 launched. She was smaller than her predecessor, built for speed and agility rather than the sheer overwhelming presence of the original, but she carried the same spirit. White oak hull, reinforced with seastone composite that Robin's research team had developed. Magical wards woven through the keel and ribs, courtesy of Dumbledore's parting gifts and the wizard craftsmen who had volunteered to help build her. And at the top of the main mast, catching the wind, flying proud against the blue sky of a perfect sailing day, Whitebeard's Jolly Roger. With one modification. A thin, barely visible lightning bolt running through the crossbones. Harry's mark. His signature. The symbol that said, "This ship carries the will of Edward Newgate and the legacy of Lily Potter. Destruction and love. Quake and sacrifice. 2 worlds, 1 family." The crew assembled on deck for the maiden voyage. Smaller than the original Whitebeard pirates, 50 souls instead of 1,600, but every single one of them chosen. Trusted. Family. Marco the Phoenix, first mate, standing at the helm with his hands in his pockets and his half-lidded eyes scanning the horizon with the quiet competence of a man who had been keeping ships on course since before Harry could walk. The blue flames at his shoulders were barely visible in the sunlight, banked low, content, the fire of a phoenix who had burned through grief and loss and come out the other side still burning. Vista, wearing his finest coat and his most elaborate mustache configuration, standing at the port rail with his twin swords gleaming. He'd accepted Harry's offer to join the new crew without hesitation, because Vista was, at his core, a man who followed his heart, and his heart said, sail with the kid. Jozu. Haruta. Aizo, who had appeared 3 weeks ago after months of silence, wearing a new kimono and carrying a new set of pistols and offering no explanation for his absence beyond, I heard you were building something. I want in. 15 other Whitebeard remnants who had chosen this ship, this captain, this future. And, standing slightly apart from the pirates, not separated but distinct, maintaining their own identity within the larger whole, Lupin and Tonks. They'd chosen to stay. Permanently. The wizarding world had been their home, but this world, this ocean, these people, this impossible intersection of magic and piracy and found family, had become something more. Are you sure? Harry had asked Lupin, when the werewolf had formally requested to join the crew. Your world needs you. The Order is rebuilding under capable leadership, Lupin had replied, his scarred face carrying a piece that Harry had never seen on it before. And I spent 15 years thinking I'd failed James and Lily because I lost their son. I found him. I found him alive and extraordinary and happy, raised by people who loved him better than any of us could have. His eyes had gone bright. I'm not losing him again. If staying means I can be part of Harry's life, part of this crew, this family, then I'm staying. Tonks had been less eloquent but more direct, Remus stays, I stay. Also, your ocean has literal sea monsters and I've been waiting my entire life for an opportunity like this. Sign me up. So they were crew. Wizard crew on a pirate ship. Just another impossibility in a career made entirely of impossibilities. And Robin. Robin stood at the prow, one hand on the railing, the wind catching her dark hair and throwing it behind her like a flag. She wore her usual outfit, practical, elegant, functional, with one addition, a thin chain around her neck, carrying a small pendant in the shape of Whitebeard's Jolly Roger. Harry had given it to her 3 days ago, wordlessly, setting it on her desk beside a cup of coffee. She'd put it on without comment. She hadn't taken it off since. She was looking at the horizon. Not with the searching gaze of a woman hunting for something specific, but with the open, wondering gaze of someone seeing the world fresh. 2 worlds worth of history to uncover. 2 worlds worth of truth to find. 2 worlds worth of poneglyphs and ancient texts and dimensional mysteries waiting to be read by the only woman alive who could read them. Harry walked to the prow and stood beside her. Ready? He asked. Robin looked at him. Those deep blue eyes, those crinkles at the corners, that controlled composure overlaying a warmth so vast it could fill an ocean. Where are we going? She asked. Wherever the sea takes us. Harry grinned. Wide. Fierce. His father's grin. His own grin. The grin of a man who had been given the power to shatter worlds and had chosen, instead, to protect them. We've got poneglyphs to find. Mysteries to solve. 2 dimensions worth of history to dig up. And I've got it on good authority that there's an island 3 weeks east of here with ruins that might be connected to the Void Century. Whose authority? Dumbledore sent a letter. Apparently the wizarding world has records of anomalous dimensional contact dating back 800 years. Right around the time the Void Century started. Robin's composure shattered. Not cracked. Not chipped. Shattered, replaced by an expression of pure, incandescent, scholarly hunger that made her look approximately 10 years younger and approximately 10 times more dangerous. 3 weeks east, she demanded. 3 weeks east. We can make it in 2 if we adjust the sail configuration and I use my arms to, Robin. What? Take a breath. She looked at him. He looked at her. The ocean stretched around them, infinite and patient and full of secrets, and the ship beneath their feet hummed with the combined energy of two worlds and the will of a family that refused to be broken by anything the universe threw at it. Robin breathed. Then she smiled, that wide, real, devastating smile that she gave him and only him, the one that made the world go quiet and bright and worth every scar. "Let's go," she said. Harry turned to the crew. His crew. His family. Pirates and wizards and misfits and brothers and the woman who made the noise in his head go quiet. All hands. Harry's voice carried across the ship, amplified by a touch of quake vibration that made the sails billow and the hull sing. "Set course east. Full sail. We've got a world to explore, scratch that, we've got two worlds to explore. And we're not stopping until we've found every secret they're hiding." The crew roared. Marco smiled. A real one. The one he saved for moments like this, moments when the kid he'd helped raise stood at the helm of a new ship and sounded so much like Pops that the Phoenix half expected to hear a gururara roll across the deck. Vista drew his swords and crossed them overhead in salute. Jozu nodded. Once. Which was, for Jozu, equivalent to a 3-paragraph speech. Haruta hooped and ran up the rigging like a monkey with a sword. Lupin and Tonks stood together at the stern, the werewolf's arm around the Metamorphmagus' shoulders, both of them grinning at the ocean like children seeing the sea for the first time. And Harry Newgate, Harry Potter, Quake's son, the boy who lived, the son of the strongest man in the world, stood at the prow of the Moby Dick 2 with the wind in his hair and the ocean before him and Robin beside him, and he felt something that he hadn't felt since the day Pops died. Whole. Not the unified frequency kind of whole, though that was there too, humming through his body like a song that never ended. Not the Horcrux-free kind of whole, though the clean silence behind his scar was a gift he'd never stop being grateful for. Just, whole. Complete. A man who knew who he was, what he carried, and who stood with him. A son who carried his father's will. A brother who kept his promises. A partner who chose to walk beside the woman he loved while she chased the truth. A captain who would crack the sky apart before he let anyone harm his family. The Moby Dick 2 caught the wind and surged forward, cutting through the waves like she was born for this moment, which she was, because ships are like people, they come alive when they find their purpose. Harry reached up and touched the flag above him. Whitebeard's Jolly Roger, with its hidden lightning bolt, snapping in the breeze like a battle standard made of memory and promise. "Hey Pops," he said quietly. Too quiet for anyone to hear. Just him and the wind and the ghost of a giant's laugh. "I'm doing okay. Marco's got the helm. The crew's strong. I met someone, you'd like her. She reads more than anyone I've ever met and she's got this way of making me feel like the world makes sense even when it absolutely doesn't. I think you'd tell me I got lucky. And I'd tell you that luck had nothing to do with it. You taught me how to find family, Pops. You taught me how to love people so big that the world can't help but notice. I'm just doing what you showed me." The wind picked up. The sails filled. The ship leaped forward. And Harry could have sworn, on his life, on his power, on everything he held sacred, that somewhere in the sound of the wind and the waves and the creak of the rigging, he heard it. Faint. Distant. Impossible. Gururara. Harry's eyes stung. His quake hummed. And his grin, that wide, warm, world-shaking grin, stretched so far it almost hurt. "Yeah," he whispered. "Love you too, Pops." The Moby Dick 2 sailed into the sunrise. The ocean opened before her like a promise. Two worlds stretched to the horizon, full of secrets and danger and adventure and the kind of freedom that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and choosing to be more. A son carries his father's will. And this son? He was gonna shake the whole damn world. Chapter 4 End.